recognize it, and so do not at once pull up and stop it, and say, "This is not I decline to be swept away, I stand firm." If we remember to do that in time, the emotion disappears promptly. Most people make the resolve not to be overcome when they are quite calm, but unfortunately when the wave of sensation arrives with a rush upon them, they do not at the moment want to resist it. The soul inside is not immediately awake to the danger, so it allows itself to be swept away and to be identified with the emotion or sensation. We must therefore learn to catch it exactly at the moment of its coming, for if we let that slip, it is a very difficult matter, when the sensation is in full blast, to check it suddenly, though sometimes another person can do it for us. Afterwards, when we remember, we regret it. The practical thing to do is to try to control the sensation each time a little sooner, and if we can suppress it once before it gets into its swing, the probability is that we shall be able to do so invariably after that. 292. It is difficult at first only because the man as a self has abdicated his rights on so many previous occasions that he has got out of the habit of asserting them. But if he will once assert them at the critical moment, he will find that he can do it again and again, because the elemental that is the cause of the difficulty will begin to be afraid. Will begin to realize that he cannot sweep everything before him. At first he is quite confident, like a dog that rushes at a man, barking and snarling because he thinks him to be afraid. But if the man does not turn and run away, the dog hesitates and begins to be a little doubtful about the enterprise. The elemental has not the intelligence of a dog. He may or may not know that we are stronger than he, but if he does not, it is only because we have not asserted ourselves. We should let him know that we are his master. When once he feels that, he will hesitate at the very beginning to start his wave. Check him at the beginning, and there will be no further trouble. 293. We have to learn from sensation by observing it in others also. In this way we come to understand human nature. We can see how other people make fools of themselves under the influence of emotion, and seeing how bad it looks in them, and how much harm it obviously does them, we learn to repress any touch of the same thing in ourselves. It is naturally much easier to see things in others than in ourselves, when we are standing outside as spectators. We should not, however, look at other people in order to criticize them and pick out their faults, but only to see what we can learn from them. When we see them distinctly not living up to their best and highest, because of some passion or emotion or some feeling of repugnance, we can make a mental note of that, without feeling in the least that we are better than they, and we can think, might not the same thing have happened to me? Let me see that it shall not happen. Thus, without getting into the habit of criticizing, which is always bad, we can learn from the mistakes of other people. When we see another person come to grief, however sorry we may be for him, there can be no harm in thinking, "Let me not fall over the precipice too," it is enough that one person has done so. 294. Great waves of sensation flooded the world during the war. Among them was a tremendous amount of repugnance and hatred against the powers with whom we happened to be at war. I am not in the least meaning to defend the atrocities committed by those powers. I know that they occurred, because I have myself, astrally, seen a very great deal of them, that filled me with shame for humanity. I do not for a moment wish to deny those facts, to gloss them over, or to excuse them. But there was also great danger and harm in the strong rush of feeling against those who committed the crimes. The people responsible for the atrocities were those who committed them, and the individuals by whose orders they were done, not the whole nation. Assuredly a great many things were done by Englishmen in the past with which we should not like to identify ourselves, and that has been the same in every nation. We must not let ourselves be carried away into injustice in thought any more than into injustice of speech or of action. 295. Our enemies intentionally went to work deliberately to stir up hatred against us. That may, perhaps, have been effective for the time, as one of the tricks of the campaign. They may have found that it paid in getting recruits and money, and so on, but it was a serious moral mistake. By it they put themselves quite conclusively in the wrong, as far as all higher aspects of the matter were concerned. But there is danger in such a case lest we should feel hatred too. One has to be absolutely determined in the fight against evil, to carry it through to the uttermost, and yet be entirely free from anything like a thought of hatred. Remember how the Lord Buddha said, "Hatred never saith by hatred. On the contrary, it is always stirred up by it." 296. When one hears of terrible atrocities perpetrated upon women and children, one cannot but feel intense indignation. There is no harm in feeling indignant against such evil-doing. It is a terrible thing, and all right-minded people will and should denounce it decidedly, without any sort of palliation or excuse, but it would be a great mistake to hate the unfortunate man who commits the crimes. He is to be pitied much more than blamed. It is not our business to blame him, but it is our duty to make it impossible for him to do these things again. Our attitude should be that which a man would take toward some wild beast that is attacking his children. He would not dignify it by hating it, but he would put it out of the way. We should be exceedingly sorry for the unfortunate people who did such things, because we see what the karma of it must be. 297. It is a terrible thing that women and children should be massacred, more terrible, perhaps, for the relations than for the victims themselves, but it is worst of all for those who commit the crime. It is they who are most to be pitied, because their suffering in the end will be very far more terrible. 298. As far as lies in our power we will take steps to prevent what has been done from being done again, but we must have no sense of hatred. It is a case of noblesse oblige. We stand quite infinitely above the sort of person who does that kind of thing, we are ages past him in evolution and development. We stand as far removed from him as he stands from the animal kingdom, and since that is so we ought to show our higher development by not sharing that passion of hatred. 299. We can study the effects of sensation only if we dissociate ourselves from it, if we stand outside and try to control the feeling and to learn from it. We must not be swept away in any such maelstrom of popular feeling, but we must try to see where it is wrong, and do what we can to put it right. Many people, who are under the influence of that sensation of tremendous passion, think of us as rather apathetic and cold. It is even possible that they sometimes think of us as lacking in patriotism if we refuse to hate. Of course that is not logical, but then people are not logical when under the influence of these great waves of hatred. We can explain to them that patriotism does not call on one to hate other countries, but they sometimes do not see that we can love our own country without being obliged to hate another. 300. Our attitude towards these things is very much that which we should take towards the troubles of little children. A child breaks a doll and is in a tempest of tears and a passion of regret over it. We do all we can to sympathize with that child, but we are quite philosophical, we do not share the passion of regret. We are not in despair because a doll is broken or because this or that small matter may have happened in the school life of the child. We realize that there is a future, and that as compared to that future all these little matters are only temporary and not of great importance, although they are tremendously so to the child. We should be failing in our duty if we did not give the sympathy, but we should be foolish if we felt as much as that child felt, we should ourselves be acting in a childish manner. It is exactly the same with the man who is learning to adopt a philosophical attitude. He sympathizes with the people who are so passionately upset over these things, but he himself is not disturbed. Just as one says to the child, "Oh, well, never mind, it will be all right by and by," so we should like to say to those who are surging under these emotions, "If you would only believe it, everything will come right and all will go well." If we say that, we are considered unsympathetic, but it is absolutely true. We often find it difficult to avoid wonder as to how people can be so blind. We see them surging wildly about things that do not matter in the least. They are often people with splendid possibilities, but they do not see them, and they allow themselves to be overwhelmed by mad surges of desire. We did the same thing ourselves thousands of years ago, perhaps. Therefore we learn to be patient, understanding that it is a stage in evolution, though a very undesirable stage. So those of us who are still in danger of yielding to emotions of that sort must pull ourselves up and say, 20 lives ago this was perhaps excusable, but now, the time for it is past. If in everyday life we see a man of mature age throwing away all his time and pleasure we know that that may have been all very well 20 years ago, but now he ought to be thinking about the more serious things of life. In the same way we ought to have risen to a level where our emotions are the higher emotions, where we have the one great idea of the work that God wills us to do. 301:7. Kill out the hunger for growth. 302. Grow as the flower grows, unconsciously, but eagerly anxious to open its soul to the air. So must you press forward to open your soul to the eternal. But it must be the eternal that draws forth your strength and beauty, not desire of growth. For in the one case you develop in the luxuriance of purity, in the other you harden by the forcible passion for personal stature. 303 AB. In the later stage of growth the disciple will feel himself opening out into the eternal and realizing its beauty more and more. The wish to grow that he may be greater than his brother then becomes impossible for him. Before that stage is reached he is still in danger, because of the greatness of what he has already achieved. If he thinks of his growth as belonging to the separated self, and feels that he is himself becoming great, he is likely to fall. The only way to avoid that danger is to get rid of the wish to be great, to yield not to the desire for growth for one's own sake. For when he is on the higher plane of human growth the disciple must be indifferent as to whether he grows or not, but must care only for the divine life and the divine will. And think only of the joy that can bring to all who welcome it into their lives. 304, CWL, we are to grow as the flower grows. Why? Because the flower grows unselfishly, absolutely altruistically. It grows not to display itself, but in order that its race may become greater by its death. It exists not for the sake of obtaining fruit for itself, because the fruit does not come until the flower is dead. Its entire growth is not for itself, but for other plants yet to come. So it is not by thinking of ourselves, but by striving for the good of others that we must press forward. The one great idea, that of helping in the work of the Logos, must draw us on. We must work for the attainment of all virtues and powers simply in order that we may be of more use in His service. By forgetting ourselves in unselfish work we grow as part of the whole and so, develop in the luxuriance of purity. Chapter 6. Rules 9-12. 305, CWL, as far as we have gone in this book we have had the negative side of things before us. We have been told to kill out certain desires, but now we come to the positive side and learn what we may, and indeed must, desire. It may strike us as curious that we should be told to desire anything. Those who have studied the Indian books will remember that this is a point on which even the Upanishads differ. One Upanishad deprecates desire of all kinds. It argues that even to desire the right must be avoided, because we must be absolutely without any preference for this or for that. Another of those great scriptures directs that we must have the desire for progress, and says that when all other desires are conquered but the desire for the growth of the soul then there is for a man no more possibility of grief. We can reconcile those two statements if we take the first one to mean that if we have the desire to cooperate in even the higher work of the world as a separate self, thinking of ourselves and of the great things we can do, there is still a tinge of the idea of separation. But if we are able to think of ourselves as a part of humanity and as earning our advance on behalf of the humanity of which we are a part, and there is no longer any thought of self, then we have raised and purified our desire into an aspiration which is altogether desirable. 306:9. Desire only that which is within you. 307, for within you is the light of the world, the only light that can be shed upon the path. If you are unable to perceive it within you, it is useless to look for it elsewhere. 308. The thought expressed in this comment is common to all religions, though they put it in different ways. We get it in Christianity, but as a rule only the Christian mystics seem to have understood it. We have it in the beautiful verse. 309. Though Christ 1,000 times in Bethlehem be born. 310, but not within thyself, thy soul shall be forlorn. 311, and on the cross of Calvary he hangeth but in vain. 312, unless within thy heart it be set up again. 313, it is easy to see what that means. If a man does not believe in his own inherent divinity, there is no hope of progress for him, because he would then have nothing within him on which he could work. Nothing within which would lift him to anything higher. But if he knows that there is within him the wonderful Christ principle, then he recognizes that to unfold that divinity is only a question of time, and that his share in the work is to bring his outer vehicles into harmony, so that this inner glory may shine through. That is the meaning of the words, Christ in you the hope of glory. The hope that we have within us is this divine spark. The man who refuses to believe he has that within him places an insuperable obstacle in his own path, until he realizes his mistake. 314. It is indeed true that salvation can be gained only through the Christ, not a man who lived and died, but the Christ principle within us. 1 Anti, Volume 1, Part 1, ch. 4, the preliminary prayer. Within us is our Savior. This is the true Christian doctrine, in support of which we might quote many texts. All the ways in which the modern presentation of Christianity has, if one may put it so, gone wrong and made itself ridiculous, arise from the misunderstanding of that great idea. It should always be remembered that Christianity started with the beautiful Gnostic philosophy, but the ignorant among its followers refused to include in their scheme of religion anything which was beyond their comprehension, or anything which took years of study to learn. So they cast out the great Gnostic doctors as heretics. They applied to religion that unwise method of coming to a decision, the majority vote, with dire results. 315. Originally Christianity had a most beautiful statement of philosophy, the one philosophy that lies behind all religions. When the gospel story, which was meant as an allegory, was degraded into a pseudo-historical account of the life of a man, the religion became incomprehensible. Consequently, all the texts which really refer to this higher side of things have been distorted, and of course, they will not fit in with the truth which lies behind the idea. Because Christianity has forgotten much of its own original teaching, in these days it is customary to deny that it could ever have possessed any esoteric teaching. There is, however, sufficient evidence to convince the unprejudiced student that this higher knowledge did exist and was well known to the apostles and church fathers. I cannot go fully into that at present. Suffice it to remind the reader that Origen, the greatest of the church fathers, asserts the existence of this secret teaching. He draws a distinction between popular irrational faith, which leads to what he calls somatic Christianity, and the spiritual Christianity. By somatic Christianity, he means that faith which is based on the gospel history, and adds that it is a very good teaching for the masses, but that the spiritual Christian has the gnosis, and therefore understands that all the incidents related therein, the birth, the baptism, the illumination, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension happened not once only in one place, but are steps in the spiritual life of every Christian man as he progresses. 1 C. Anti. Volume 1, Part 5, ch. 5, Superstition. 316. Modern orthodoxy still bases its beliefs on the ignorant faith of the undeveloped multitude, and persists in disowning what now remains of its once magnificent heritage, in the shape of a few priceless fragments of the Gnostic teaching. Having lost the higher interpretation, it makes a desperate effort to present the lower one in a comprehensible form, but that cannot be done. Students of theosophy have the knowledge which enables them to interpret all these strange doctrines, and to see sense and beauty even in the crude utterances of the street preacher. Because they understand what he would mean if only he knew a little more about his subject. 317. So what we are to desire is that which is within ourselves all the time, we shall not find it elsewhere. This very same idea was presented to us long ages ago in ancient Egypt. There they centered all their ideas of religion in the hidden light and the hidden work. 1 Anti. Volume 1, Part 5, ch. 6, Service. The hidden light was the light that is in every man, and the hidden work was that which would enable him to manifest it, to bring it out in himself and then to help its development in others. That was the cardinal point of their creed, that the light is there, however much it may be overlaid, and however hopeless it may appear, our work is to withdraw the veils and let the light shine forth. 318. People often make the mistake of looking for it elsewhere. They say, we want the masters to help us, we want the masters to raise us. But I say, with the greatest reverence and respect, the master cannot do that, the Logos himself cannot do it. The master can tell us how we may raise ourselves. The process is exactly analogous to the development of strength in the muscle. No one can do that for another, but if he has the knowledge he can tell him how to do it for himself, and that is all the help one can have from outside. Another person can tell us that he followed certain rules and exercises and found that they brought good results. The master or the advanced pupil can also undoubtedly pour upon us force which makes our work easier, but that is all. It is the same all the way through. If we do not feel within us the power to respond to the beauty and glory of nature, that beauty and glory will pass us by. If we cannot see God within ourselves, it is useless to look for him outside. When we have realized ourselves as part of him, then will the God within respond to the God without, and we shall begin to be really useful in his work, which, after all, is our chief object in life. 3:19:10. Desire only that which is beyond you. 3:20, it is beyond you, because when you reach it you have lost yourself. 3:21, CWL, that again is a statement which has its parallel in the Christian teaching. Christ himself says quite plainly, he that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. 1:1 Matthew 10:39. That happens over and over again at various stages. Consider the man of the world living his ordinary life, which is very largely a life in his emotions, in some cases in quite the lower emotions. As soon as he begins to understand the higher side of things he realizes that there is something higher and nobler than that. But he finds also that unless he is willing to put aside that lower and coarser life, he cannot really grasp the higher. He must lose the lower in order that he may gain the higher. 3:22, at the next step the man comes to live in his mind to a large extent. He realizes that to be swept about by tides of passion is, after all, ignoble, and that the mind should select and dominate the emotions and allow only such as it approves, for the sake of progress. Presently he gets beyond that, and finds that the mind also is not fully satisfactory, but that there is a higher life than that of the mind. So gradually he begins to live in the ego, and to look at everything from that standpoint, which is a very great advance. But eventually even that is not enough for him. He realizes that there is a unity which lies beyond that stage, and so he begins to have some experience of the Buddhic plane, and when he touches that nothing below it will ever again satisfy him. 323. Even that wonderful Buddhic consciousness will, in its turn, be transcended. Beyond it is the consciousness of the Atmic plane, nirvana. Above and beyond that again is the monad. Those who are not yet adepts see the monad manifesting as a triple spirit on the plane below its own, but on the attainment of adeptship the monad and the ego will have become one, and they will be conscious as the monad, the divine spark. 324. At each of these stages we feel that we have grasped the truth, and entered upon the real life, but presently we realize that there is something still higher, as high again as that was beyond our previous experience. All the way up we have to drop the lower before we can really gain the higher. That is to say, we have to lose the life we know before we can reach the higher life which we hope to attain. At each stage, as we reach it, we find that we have lost the self which we have known previously, because we have transcended it. We have lost it in finding a higher self. 325. It is written in the books that we become one with the Logos, merged in him. Now, that final result we know nothing of, but this much some of us can say from our own personal experience, that many such mergings at different levels take place in the progress of the soul. And in each of them it seems that we become utterly one with the highest which then we can reach, yet never through all that do we lose anything of our true self. When we rise, let us say, into the Buddhic consciousness, and lose the causal body, we have lost the lower life, but that was never more than a very inadequate manifestation of a small part of us. All that we have gained through the long series of lives is still there. What we have shed is only the outer form in which our various qualities express themselves. We have the qualities still, on a higher level, shining forth with greater brilliancy, but the form in which they were cast has gone. Because people so constantly identify the life with the form, to many it seems that should they lose that form there would be nothing left. On the contrary, nothing that has been gained is ever lost. 3:26:11. Desire only that which is unattainable. 3:27. It is unattainable, because it forever recedes. You will enter the light, but you will never touch the flame. 328, CWL. This does not mean that the higher life at which we aim is unattainable, but that when we have reached one height we always see another peak beyond. We shall draw ever nearer and nearer to the divine, becoming one with him at level after level, but the flame, his true consciousness, we shall never touch. There are many stages on the way, and they grow more and more indescribable in their beauty as we rise. To whatever height we raise our consciousness, into whatever ineffable glories we can rise, we always see something more glorious still beyond. The flame ever recedes. So far as any knowledge that we have goes, that chain of increasing glory and beauty is endless. Perhaps it is not much use speculating upon that. The Lord Buddha said long ago that it was profitless to speak of the beginning and the end, because veil after veil will lift, but there must be veil after veil behind. 329. I wish I could bring home to every one, as utterly and as vividly as I myself feel it, this absolute certainty of the progress that lies ahead, of its wonderful glory and beauty and power and wisdom and love. How from step to step it rises and becomes ever more and more indescribable down here, and more glorious and beautiful and true above. The road to it lies through unselfishness. Only when we rise out of the lower self into the higher life, into the wider universal self does the way open, and there is no limit to the glory and the splendor which man may then attain. Chapter 7. Rules 13-16. 330:13. Desire power ardently. 331, CWL, the comment of the Chohan on this is 332. And that power which the disciple shall covet is that which shall make him appear as nothing in the eyes of men. 333. The power that makes us appear as nothing in the eyes of men is the power of self-effacement in the work, of doing it without wanting any credit for it. Many people want to be in the forefront. That is often regarded as merely a sort of harmless vanity, but it means that they have not yet forgotten the lower self. 334. The disciple does not seek credit for anything he does. He seeks to get the work done, and so long as it is done he cares not at all whether he or somebody else has the credit for having done it. If he has to put himself forward and draw people round him he does so, but not because he wants the credit of it. He knows it is always far better to keep in the background if possible. 335. It is always best not to think of results at all, but to do the best we can and forget ourselves. All occult teaching leads back to that one fundamental fact: forget the lower self and get to work. Some people are constantly thinking of their own progress. It is at least better to think of making spiritual progress than to desire worldly wealth, but it is still selfishness, only in a more refined form. My own experience would lead me to say that the very best way to get on is to forget all about one's own progress and simply devote oneself to the Master's work. 1 Anti, Volume 1, Part 3, Ch2, The One Good Desire. Volume 2, pages 360-1. If one does that the rest will follow. It is the old truth stated in the Gospel: seek ye first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. 2 Matthew 6:33. That is utterly true. These other things come. When we are not looking for progress we suddenly find that we have really made some, and that also is well. 336. When a man first sees what life in the causal body is really like, he also realizes how very useful he could be at that level, how many lines there are along which his activity could pour itself out. And he may well be disposed to ask, Is it not better that I should do this new and splendid work which I see opening before me? I have myself made a practice of seeking the advice or wish of the master whenever what seemed to be grand opportunities opened up, and yet there was a possibility that it might be even better still to renounce them. I would say, Master, what do you wish me to do? Often his reply would be, it is a matter for you to decide. Then one can only use one's own best judgment. No rule can be laid down in such cases. I should still be disposed to try the higher. But it must be remembered that we are cautioned again and again, do not let desire for your own development stand in the way of any useful work that you can do. Your development will come in due course. I have always followed that plan, and I think that it is the safest attitude. 337. Through the work done in that spirit of self-forgetfulness we gain the power which shall make us appear as nothing in the eyes of men. Let us, if necessary, welcome humiliation because it all helps to put the personality out of sight, and that is what is most needed. When opportunities come, we must take them, but always we should think, it is not my work, it is the master's work. It does not matter which of those who follow the master has the privilege of doing any particular piece of work for him. Our business is to watch that we may lose no opportunity of doing any part of his work. 338. We should understand that there is nothing small or great in his work, but that anything, however small, done and offered to him is as important in his sight as that which is a far greater achievement in the world's eyes. We are a little apt to want to do what we think is the greater work. That is because we do not see that all parts of the work are equally necessary. Realize for a moment how he must look down upon the whole from his stupendous elevation of wider power and knowledge. All these pieces of work will look very tiny, but all fit into their places. 339. All the problems of life which seem complex, if not incomprehensible, down here, become far simpler when looked at from a higher plane. The same thing is true of much lower levels. When one examines microscopic creatures such as live in a drop of water, one finds complex and beautiful forms of life. The further one goes into these infinitely small matters, the more one discovers their amazing complexity. One wonders how even to the deity himself these worlds could possibly be a simple thing, and yet they are, for when we look from even such higher points of view as we are able to gain, we can see that it is the permutations and combinations of the 7 forces of the one life which produce all these wonderful results. The factors involved in the production are few and simple, therefore the higher one rises the more one can understand, and that which down here seems impossible to grasp proves quite within reach when viewed from higher levels. 340. We may reverently and reasonably assume, I think, that the Logos can hold the whole of his system simultaneously in his mind, and without any difficulty see what is being done in every remotest ramification of it. The whole system in all its multiplicity must be immediately self-evident, something one could put down on a sheet of foolscap, as it were. To the Manu and Bodhisattva the work of molding and guiding the races of men, which seems to us so complex and even confused, must be quite clear and straightforward. 341. Our business is to serve the Master in our small sphere. The detail is our care, not his. What he wants is that the whole work shall go well, and anything that we can do to make it do so is our share in it. Those who stand nearer to him in thought and have by such association grown somewhat into his attitude in regard to it, are always eager to do anything, however simple, which may seem of use. We can write a little letter, perhaps, which will change the current of a man's life, or we may deliver a lecture and try to change the opinion of some hundreds of people, and not succeed. The little letter is just as real a piece of work. There may be some of us who are so busy that we cannot do anything personally. In that case we are probably earning money, and so perhaps we could give some money to enable others to do that work. There are a great many little ways in which everyone can work. It is no use waiting for a big opportunity with the idea that when it comes we shall be ready to take it. We are very much more likely to be ready if we get ourselves into the habit of always doing the little things that we can do now. 342. A man who works without any regard to his own interests and is always willing to remain in the background is inevitably misunderstood by the world. People understand and admire a man of strong will, who sets out to make a name for himself, to make an impression, and pushes his way to the front. Such a man has succeeded, from their point of view, he has shown the world that he is a strong man. The occultist may be in reality much more forceful, but he would not show his power in that way. He seeks generally to efface himself. He realizes that one of the greatest qualifications is to know when to get out of the way, to know when to let the divine power do its work without spoiling and hindering it by putting himself in the way of it. It seems so simple, and yet the fact that there are hundreds of workers who cannot do it shows that it is really a great difficulty. 343. The man of the world is apt to regard the occultist as a person of no particular willpower, as one who is always ready to give way. So he is, as regards the minor details of life. He lets others have their way in things which do not matter, and is even willing to be managed up to a certain point, but when it comes to a question of principle, he takes a firm stand. He cares nothing about what people say. People who talk and speculate about others are wrong in 9 cases out of 10, so what does it matter what they happen to think about us? As Tennyson says, let them rave. Of course, I do not mean that we should utterly ignore all worldly conventions. In the early days some of our members felt that it was right to appear different from other people in the matter of wearing evening dress, and so on. We need not outrage the customs of society in this way. Moreover, it seems to me that if we wish to recommend our beliefs we must avoid offending the world unnecessarily. It is not good policy to set ourselves violently against other people's ideas. When there comes a point in which no principle is involved we must give way, merely because there is no sense in flying in the face of the usages of the world. 344. In all matters of principle we must take a firm stand. For example, strict vegetarianism is with us a principle, because we believe it to be best in every way, not only for ourselves but for all the world around us. It is a little inconvenient when we go out to dinner or when we are traveling, but we let such trifling inconveniences pass, and keep to our own point of view. But in a vast number of other things, which really do not matter, it saves trouble to yield to the ordinary customs of the time. As regards our dress, to take another instance. The dress of modern man is peculiarly ugly, uncomfortable and unhealthy, but it saves trouble to adopt it. If we set ourselves against it, however much more rational, aesthetic and beautiful our costume might be, we should attract unwelcome attention, and should probably be regarded as more or less insane. It is not worth while. It is better not to make ourselves unduly conspicuous by opposing things which do not matter. But when a principle is involved we must hold steadily to what we think is right. 11 Anti, Volume 1, Part 2, ch. 3, Right and Wrong. 345. If we could get into an absolutely impersonal attitude about all work it would help us very much. Ruskin speaks of that with regard to art. He says that while self-praise and conceit are vulgar beyond words, undue self-depreciation is only another form of vulgarity. We should aim at the condition of mind in which we are able to view the work from the outside, and to say, be it mine or yours, or whose else it may, this also is well. We must be able to praise a good piece of work when we see it, not because it is ours or our friends, or because it bears a great name, but just because it is good, putting aside absolutely the question of who did it. I am afraid we do not always do this. Our reason for quoting something is not always because it is fine and beautiful, but because Madame Blavatsky said it or Dr. Bezanт wrote it. 346. There is, however, a side to that which is quite right and true. When people meet with a statement about something which they do not know and cannot verify for themselves, it is a matter of importance to them who said it. They may say, Dr. Bezanт makes this statement, I have great reason to believe that she knows all about this matter, consequently I accept her statement. After all, that is no more than we do in regard to science. There are many facts in science which we have no means of proving for ourselves, but because certain eminent men have investigated these subjects and have come to certain conclusions we accept them. But when we consider a beautiful ethical statement, it does not matter whether it comes from the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran or the Vedas, we should accept it for its worth. It is then a question of the felicity of the expression and the beauty of the idea. 347. Just as we accept things, or try to do so, for what they are worth, so we must try to value our own work at what it is worth, and not think that, because we have done it, it must necessarily be well done. Most men who can do anything very well know also the imperfections of their work. When a thing is good we should gladly admit that it is so. When we see faults in our own or in anyone else's work we should not hesitate to say, I do not agree. I think so and so might be better done. It is well to get into the attitude of mind that does not care whence a thing comes if it is a good thing, and also does not hesitate to put aside the evil, even when it comes from oneself. 348. That is difficult, truly, because when that is perfectly done it means that the man is looking down from the ego upon this lower world. Even the use of the lower mind will give much of that power, although we get it perfectly only in the causal body. The lower mind can exercise discrimination, and if we use it from the higher standpoint and do not allow it to be clouded by personal feeling, it is a very fine and beautiful thing when fully developed. We are rather proud of our intellectual development in this fifth sub-race of the fifth root race, which emphasizes this discriminating work of the lower mind. But what we call intellect is only a very small thing as compared with that which is to develop in the course of the next round, which will be that really devoted to intellect. We are proud of the achievements of the lower mind, and not without a certain amount of reason. It has done wonderful work in science and invention. But only those who are able to look forward into the future and have also seen the masters, who are men of the future, realize what we shall be perhaps in the course of a few thousands of years. I can bear witness that our highest intellectual activity now is but child's play compared to what it will be in the future, so it is clear that there is a splendid vista opening before us. 349. What the ordinary person calls his mind is exclusively the lowest part of it. In his mind there are 4 subdivisions, consisting of matter of the 7th, 6th, 5th and 4th subplanes of the mental plane respectively, but practically he is using matter of the lowest or 7th subplane only. That is very near to the astral plane, therefore all his thoughts are colored by reflections from the astral world, and so they are much mixed with emotion, feelings and desires. Very few people can deal with the 6th subplane as yet. Our great scientific men certainly use it a good deal, but unfortunately they often mingle with it the matter of the lowest subplane and then they become jealous of other people's discoveries and inventions. If they can rise to the 5th subplane they are already getting much more free from the possibility of astral entanglement. If they can raise themselves to the 4th subplane, which is the highest part of the mental body, they are then in the very middle of the mental plane, and next to them is the causal body. They are then far away from the possibility of having their thoughts affected by astral vibrations. 350. We can understand how these things work. A vibration is most easily received by that which is in tune with it. If a man feels very angry he is liable to stir up the emotion of anger in the astral bodies of other people around him. That will also disturb their lower thought. But it will not affect their higher thought, if they have any. Most people have not as yet. One of the things we as students are trying to do in our thought and meditation is to awaken the higher parts of the mental body and bring them into working order. Those who meditate regularly on the masters and on the things connected with them, must be using the higher part of the mental body to some extent, and the more it is used, the more will our thought be unaffected by desires, passions and emotions. But since most people do not get so far as that, the great mass of thought in the world is very much colored by desire, and most thought forms that we see are loaded with astral as well as with mental matter. 351. We all live much too close together, with the consequence that even while other people may not be thinking of us they affect us. Of course we in turn affect them, and we should always definitely try to affect them for good. If we set ourselves to be a center of uttermost peace and love we shall very greatly help all those around us. But while we are centers of desire and emotion and selfish feeling we make development impossible not only for ourselves but for all those near to us, and that is a very serious matter. Every aspirant ought to take to heart the fact that he is preventing the progress of others if he gives way to this personal desire. 352. The power of self-effacement is impossible of attainment until we have utterly weeded out all personal desire. We talk of our devotion to our work and to the masters, surely that is not too much to do for their sake. Even if a very great effort is necessary, we ought to be willing to make it for the sake of these great ones who have done so much for us, through whom all the theosophical teaching has come to us. It is not a question of affording them gratification by doing these things, though surely they cannot but be pleased to see the progress of those whom they are trying to help, but it is also common sense. If we want to help in evolution, the first and most necessary thing to do is to take ourselves in hand. We must gain that control over the lower self which makes us appear as nothing in the eyes of men. Be it so. Many of the great forces are working unseen. We may be among those forces, and as such we can afford to appear insignificant in the sight of the world. 353:14. Desire peace fervently. The peace you shall desire is that sacred peace which nothing can disturb, and in which the soul grows as does the holy flower upon the still lagoons. 354, CWL, this short aphorism is closely connected with the foregoing one. The power which we are told to desire leads to peace. Unless we have power over self we can have no peace. 355, only when we have gained peace can we give it to others. To be able to do that is surely one of the greatest and most beautiful of powers. Most people's lives are full of worry and anxiety, of jealousy and envy. All the time they are just a swirl not only of emotions, but also of unsatisfied desires. Many of those who take up the study of occultism, that is, the study of the reality which lies behind, still expect to be able to go on living that kind of life. Even some of those who are supposed to have been students of occultism for years, and are trying to draw nearer to the masters, apparently cannot yet give up their desires. They make no serious attempt to get rid of all their foolish and disturbing emotions, and then they wonder why they do not make progress and why others seem to pass on in front of them. How can they expect to advance until they have left all these things behind them? Until we are quite free from such disturbances it is absolutely impossible to make any real higher progress. If we want to set up communications with the Master, we must have perfect peace within. 356, it is said that struggle is a necessity for progress. It is certainly true that there is a long stage in the evolution of the soul when it is in a constant state of struggle and strife. On looking back into the past we can see that progress was then more rapid in a life of storm and stress than when the conditions were easier. In that rough hewing of the character all the troubles and difficulties which men encounter and the opposition which comes in their way no doubt teach them something, they learn their lessons from them. But at the higher stage at which the disciple has arrived that state of struggle is no longer of value. For growth of the higher kind, perfect peace is necessary. A master once wrote, "The law of the survival of the fittest is the law for the evolution of the brute, but the law of sacrifice is the law of the evolution of man." Many people think they will get peace when their mad desires are satisfied, but they find by experience that it is not so. They then begin to think what a sad thing it is that they have yielded to them, and they realize that they ought to have risen above them. There is no peace to be gained by the satisfaction of desire. Peace is to be attained in one way only, by putting aside the lower desires and developing the power which makes us as nothing in the eyes of men. 357, it is said here that the holy flower grows upon the still lagoons. It is only in still water that the lotus can unfold itself to its best, it cannot do so if it is buffeted about by wind and storm. It is only in peace that the soul can unfold. Storms of passion and desire are just like storms that beat down the flowers on the physical plane. All developments of the higher kind are like very delicate flowers, and if they are subjected to violent storms of passion they become crushed out, and disappear. People who are always in royal rages, who constantly brood over all kinds of foolish personal matters, who are always thinking about their own feelings and are filled with jealousy and envy of others, cannot develop all the fine and delicate fronds and tendrils that mean progress. 358, people in general have very little scientific idea of what occult progress, real evolution, means. Their methods of education alone show that they do not understand it. There is a certain amount of the evolution through which we have gone, up to about the level of the savage and a little higher than that, which we may consider as fairly definitely established. That is to say, we could not very well fall back below that point under any circumstances. But the growth that comes beyond that, beyond the almost animal part, or at any rate the lower and emotional part, of man, is a question of exceedingly delicate development of many sorts. The things which differentiate the highly cultured and artistic person from the quite coarse and undeveloped person are all of a very subtle nature, matters of long and slow and careful growth. They are tender shoots of great promise, which have hardly as yet blossomed forth, and have certainly not yet reached what they shall be in the future. The first blast of unfavorable conditions destroys that finer growth. The rough and tumble of modern education, in which children are frightened and sometimes even ill-treated, has the effect of crushing out all the delicate bloom of culture and refinement which souls that have come into these child bodies may have been acquiring for a very long time past, perhaps for 20 or 30 lives. In consequence the children become very much like primitive savages. They are often full of fear and hatred and a great sense of abiding injustice, and all the finer development which really marks the difference between a later and an earlier subrace is swept away. 359. People do not in the least realize what they are doing when they destroy these things, as they so often do. I constantly see boys and girls who belong perhaps to ordinary parents, but are themselves quite promising. If they were taken in hand and brought along in the right way, they would make distinct progress in this life. But their surroundings are utterly unsuited for such development and all the finer growth is lopped off and beaten back, and they go through life as quite ordinary people. I have seen cases where the same thing happened over and over again in as many as perhaps 15 or 20 lives. The progress that might have been made in the first case was not made until the 20th. Probably the accumulated karma of living a little better in a quiet way in each of those lives made it necessary at last that the ego should be given better surroundings, and then he got his opportunity. But so far as we can see that same development could just as well have been made 20 lives before, if only the environment had been a little better. 360. It is a sad thing for the people who repress those delicate touches. I suppose there is no greater crime than the repression of those who are trying to make progress. That is one of the things which the Christ meant when he spoke of the sin against the Holy Ghost which should not be forgiven either in this world or in the world to come. That word, forgiven, is, however, a mistranslation. To abandon, to put aside, gives a better idea of the meaning. What is meant is perfectly clear. The sin against the Holy Ghost is the repression of the divine spirit in man. It produces a karmic result which could nor be put right in this dispensation, neither in this world period, nor perhaps in the next, so serious is it. 361. Many people commit this crime against themselves as well as against their children. They do not give the higher part of themselves an opportunity to grow. Children are often able to see nature spirits and other beautiful things which older people cannot see. There is no reason why the older people should not see them also, if their sensitiveness had not been destroyed by the sort of life into which they have so often been plunged. Sometimes later on in life with great difficulty they begin to recover the power, not only of clairvoyance, but also the power to appreciate all that is artistic and beautiful. All the subtle shades of feeling and perception that mean culture and real education. 362. The things which affect the higher progress are all exceedingly delicate, so carefully, so exactly balanced, that the least touch in the wrong direction will throw them back for weeks and months. It is possible to throw back the growth of months in a single day. Therefore very much depends upon surroundings. One cannot always calculate upon obtaining again the same surroundings, so the occultist always strives to make the utmost use of whatever conditions he has at any time, while he is also watchful that none of them shall drag him down. One of the Puranas says. 363. Without a body no one attains the object of the soul, therefore should one take care of his body as a treasure, and perform good deeds. A village or a field or possessions or a house, or good and bad pieces of karma may be obtained again, but this body never again. 11 Garuda Purana Saradhara, 16, 17, 18. 364. People sometimes say, I cannot do much in this life. I shall try what I can do in the next. It is always well to keep before us the idea of the next life and what we can do in it, but it is not safe to depend too much on that, because the karma behind each person is sure to be more or less mixed and it sometimes asserts itself in waves. We may have karma at a certain time which will give us good surroundings. It does not follow that in the next life we shall have conditions equally good. On the whole, the probabilities are that our karma will flow on in much the same groove, but on the other hand there might be a block of unpleasant karma which the karmic authorities do not think the man strong enough to bear this time. And in the next life they might let that loose upon him, so that he might not get such good opportunities. 365. It is eminently wise to take all the opportunities available in this life. If we do that, and thus show the lords of karma that we are taking advantage of them, that will seriously influence the incidence of karma upon us in the next life. It will constitute a sort of claim for good surroundings. It is not wise, because we have many opportunities in this life, to assume that we shall have them again in our next life. We may or we may not. I do not like to hear people say, I am too old to do anything in this life. If we make good use of what we have, and advance ourselves as far as possible, we create a condition of affairs in which it would be difficult for the karmic deities not to give us opportunities again. We can make such karma along a particular line that we may take the kingdom of heaven by storm. We can force the lords of karma to so arrange our karma that the opportunity must come because the causes we have set in motion cannot work themselves out except along a similar line. Most assuredly it is well to make full use of every good opportunity that comes to us, lest by chance by neglecting it we might make a difference of a few thousand years in our evolution. 366. A few thousand years are as nothing in the long life of the soul, but we do not want to be delayed in that way. In the lives of Alcyone we find, for example, the case of one young man who had remarkably good opportunities in connection with one of the great masters in a temple in Egypt. 367. He foolishly wasted his time, threw away his opportunities and lost them. The master said then that he would always be ready to take him again when he came back. It is only in this life, 6,000 years later, that he has come back. That carelessness lost him a good deal of time. Think of what might have been done in that 6,000 years, if he had taken the offer. At that time the master who made it had not yet attained adeptship. Certainly if the pupil had accepted, he might have now been very far on the road to adeptship himself. It cannot be a matter of indifference whether a man takes such a step as that 6,000 years earlier or later. The man who took it so much earlier would have all the work of intervening years on the very highest levels to his credit. It seems impossible that it can be the same thing. 368. I do not know how far in the counsels of the Eternal what we call time matters. There is a point of view to which one may rise in which past and present and future all seem one eternal now, but even in that eternal now there are some things which are more opened and others which are less opened. And therefore the acceptance or the neglect of an opportunity must make a difference, though there may be some way in which a mistake of that kind may be adjusted in the future. In which somehow the man's regret that he did not succeed may be a force enabling him to work doubly well to try to overtake the past. One can only guess at it, only attempt to imagine how such a thing would work, but there is very distinct reason to suppose that there will be a position in which the past can be rectified. 369. It envisages itself on higher levels in a way something like this. We say the past was so and we cannot alter it. That was how it was when we were at it. How do we know what it is now that we have passed away from it? That past still exists, it is the present to someone else somewhere. That idea is difficult to understand. On the physical plane, we know that we see an object, we know of it by the light which comes from it. The light which showed us something yesterday is now many millions of miles away, and it is now showing that same thing far away. Our yesterday may be the present for someone else as far as the message of that light is concerned. Whether that analogy holds good I do not know, but something like that seems to be true. The past is somehow progressing. 370. Looking down from the higher plane on the life down here is something like standing on a mountain and watching a railway train moving in the valley below. The train has passed certain points as far as the people in it are concerned. The points are past, but they are still there. The trees and animals they saw at those points are still alive. The past is still active, but because they are not in it anymore, most people imagine that their share in it is done with. I am not sure of that. I do not think that it is very profitable to try to understand that point, because one cannot make any coherent sense of it down here. But I believe that the past is not irrevocable, and that when we in our turn reach the stage where we can look down upon it all, it will appear very much better than our present memory of it would indicate. Because somehow all that past also is moving onward as part of the divine reality of things, and that also will become glorified and will blossom out into what it should have been, I cannot pretend to say how. Still, the idea is a stimulating one, the possibility that the things which we have failed to do, the mistakes which we have made, may not be so in the end, though they are so to us now. It is an idea which is difficult to understand down here, but I am sure there is some truth behind it. 371:15. Desire possessions above all. 372. But those possessions must belong to the pure soul only, and be possessed therefore by all pure souls equally, and thus be the especial property of the whole only when united. Hunger for such possessions as can be held by the pure soul, that you may accumulate wealth for that united spirit of life which is your only true self. 373, CWL. The possessions which we are to desire are qualities which shall be of use to all humanity. Every victory we gain is to be gained for humanity, not for ourselves. The desire to possess must be one to possess with all others, a desire that all shall share the same inheritance. That is the old story of impersonality in another form. We see that beautifully illustrated in the lives of the masters. I remember long ago feeling considerable wonder as to how it could be that the masters appear without karma. They are even spoken of in some of the sacred books of the East as having risen above karma. I could not understand it, because karma is a law just as much as gravitation is. We might rise as far as the sun itself, but we should not get beyond gravitation, on the contrary we should feel it very much more strongly. It seemed to me just as impossible to escape from the law of cause and effect, since under its operation every person receives according to what he does. If the great masters are all the time doing good on a scale which we cannot in the least hope to equal, and yet they make no karma, what then becomes of the stupendous result of all their outpourings of energy? 374. Presently, after studying the problem, we began to see how it worked. If I describe what karma looks like clairvoyantly, it will perhaps help to make the matter more intelligible. The appearance of the working of the law of karma on higher planes is something as follows. Every man is the center of an incredibly vast series of concentric spheres, some of them quite near, others reaching to a prodigious distance into the far empyrean. Every thought or word or action, whether good or bad, selfish or unselfish, sends out a stream of force which rushes towards the surfaces of these spheres. This force strikes the interior surface of one or other of the spheres at right angles to it, and is reflected back to the point from which it came. From which sphere it is reflected seems to depend upon the character of the force, and this also regulates the time of its return. The force which is generated by some action strikes a sphere which is comparatively near at hand and flies back again very quickly, while other forces rush on almost to infinity and return only after many lives. Why we cannot tell. All we know is that in any case they inevitably return, and they can return nowhere but to the center from which they came forth. 375. All these forces thrown out from the man must recoil upon him so long as he projects them from himself in that way. However, every man has an interior connection with the deity which is not through any of these concentric spheres, but through the center itself. By turning within he can reach the Logos himself, and so long as he sends all the force of his thought and desire in that way, it is not reflected back to him at all, but goes to reinforce the great outwelling of divine power which the deity is always sending through his universe, by which he keeps it alive. His force wells up in the center, it does not come from without. If we look at a number of physical atoms clairvoyantly, we shall see some drawing in force and others pouring it out. They must receive that force from somewhere. It does not go in at one side and out at the other, it wells up in the center apparently from nowhere but is in reality coming from some higher dimension which we cannot see. Thus the communication with God lies in the very heart of things, and the man who turns his eyes always upon the deity, and thinks only of him in the work that he is doing, pours all his force along that line. It disappears so far as he is concerned but, as I said before, goes to reinforce the divine strength which is always being outpoured everywhere. There is no personal result for the man on lower planes, but with every such effort he draws nearer to the divine truth within him, becomes a better and fuller expression of it, and so it would not be true to say that he obtains no result. In a universe of law nothing could be without result, but there is no outward result such as would bring him back to earth. 376. That, I think, is what is meant when it is said that the great ones escape from the law of karma. They spend the whole of their mighty spiritual force upon doing good in the name of humanity and as units of humanity, and so they escape from the binding of the law. Whatever result there is comes to humanity, not to them. The karma of all the glorious actions of the Master is not held back that he may receive the result, it goes to humanity as a whole. 377. It is in that spirit of impersonality that we also should perform action. If we do anything, even a good action, thinking, I am doing this, I want the credit of this, or even if we do not think of receiving the credit for it, but only think, am doing this, like the Pharisees of old, we shall have our reward. The result will come back to the personal self, and it will bind us back to earth just as surely as though it were an evil result. But if we have forgotten the personal self altogether and are acting merely as part of humanity, it is to the humanity of which each is a part that the result of the action will come. The more truly we can act without thought of self, the nearer we shall be drawing to the divine heart of things. That is how the Logos himself looks upon everything. There could be no thought of self for him. He acts always for the good of the whole and as representing the whole. If we act thinking only of him, then the result will flow out in his divine force and will not come to us as anything that will bind, but rather as something which will make us a greater and greater expression of him. And will raise us more and more into the peace of God which passeth all understanding. Chapter 8. Rules 17-19. 378, 17. Seek out the way. 379, CWL. The three short aphorisms to which we have now come are closely intertwined, and both in the comment by the Chohan and the notes by the Master Hilarion they are practically taken together. For this reason it is hardly possible to arrange them in separate groups as has been done hitherto, and so I shall take them in the order in which they appear in the book. It is evident that we have come to a very important part of the teaching, because there is a longer comment from each of these great ones than on any of the previous sentences. 380. The Master Hilarion's note to the 17th rule begins as follows. 381. These 4 words seem, perhaps, too slight to stand alone. The disciple may say, should I study these thoughts at all, did I not seek out the way? Yet do not pass on hastily. Pause and consider a while. Is it the way you desire, or is it that there is a dim perspective in your visions of great heights to be scaled by yourself, of a great future for you to compass? Be warned. The way is to be sought for its own sake, not with regard to your feet that shall tread it. 382. The spirit in which we should approach the path is beautifully expressed in these words. All the way through the personality must be put aside, and one must work from the point of view of the higher self. To do that is to seek the way. We have already seen that even when the man has left ordinary ambition behind, he finds it again and again in subtler forms. His ambition now is to reach a higher level. He has made up his mind to desire no longer anything for the personal self, to put whatever power he has entirely at the service of the Great White Lodge. He thinks only of being a good instrument, of bringing himself into such a position in relation to the Master that his forces may play through him with as little hindrance as possible. 383. All forces coming down from higher planes naturally meet with great constriction when they come to work on a lower plane. The force which comes through any disciple can never be more than a very small part of the influence which some great one may send through him. That must be so by the very nature of the case, but one who makes himself, with all the imperfections that naturally cling to us on the physical plane, as perfect an instrument as possible for the Master's force, can do very useful work. The object of the disciple is to let as much as possible of that force flow through him, and to discolor it as little as he can. 384. The force is poured through him in order that he may disseminate it, but he is not expected to be a mere machine in its distribution. He does lend to it something of himself, something of his own coloring. That is intended and expected, but it must be in perfect harmony with the Master's attitude and feeling. That is possible because the pupil becomes one with the Master in a very wonderful way, as I have explained in the Masters and the Path. 1, 1 op. Cit. Chv. It is not only that all that is in the consciousness of the pupil is also in the consciousness of the Master, but that everything that takes place in the presence of the pupil is also in the Master's consciousness, not necessarily when it is happening, unless he chooses, but quite certainly within his memory. If the Master happens to be busily engaged in some of his higher work for the moment, it does not necessarily follow that he is attending to a conversation which the pupil is carrying on at the time. But we have startling evidence that sometimes he may be, because occasionally he interjects a thought or a remark, and corrects something that is being said. 385. As I have explained elsewhere, any feeling which the pupil allows himself to have will react upon the Master. If it were such a feeling as annoyance or anger, the Master would shut it out in a moment. Naturally the pupil does not want to give him the trouble of doing that, though, perhaps, if one may say it with all reverence, it is not a very great trouble. Possibly the Master does this very quickly, in a single thought, but yet one does not wish to cause even that trifling interruption of his work. 386. Naturally also the pupil wants to avoid the shutting off of himself which necessarily happens at the same time, therefore he tries, as far as he may, to prevent any undesirable thought or feeling from entering his consciousness. He would keep away from a noisy crowd or from any place with exceedingly bad magnetism, unless he had to go there to do the Master's work. In that case he would put a shell round himself and see that no unpleasantness reached the Master. Still, purely physical things in the consciousness of the pupil are also in the consciousness of the Master. If, for example, the pupil is startled by a sudden sound, it gives him a little shock. That little shock is communicated to the Master. He cares nothing for it, he puts it aside, but the fact remains that it is communicated, and that shows how close is the tie. A pupil who is wise tries to avoid any kind of shock. He is generally rather a gentle and quiet sort of person, for that reason. 387. It is one of the distinguishing marks of the pupil that he never forgets his Master, or the presence of his Master. So he does not allow within himself, if he can help it, except by inadvertence, any thought or feeling that he does not want recorded in the Master's thought or feeling, and he even tries to avoid, as far as may be, exterior disturbances which might also be of a kind that would cause him to be temporarily shut off. 388. The delight to the pupil of that close union with the Master is intense. The joy of being in touch with so glorious an intelligence, with such splendid emotions, or rather powers, because such things as devotion, love and sympathy, in a Master cannot be called emotions. They are great powers, is wonderful, beautiful beyond words. The more the pupil lays himself open to those higher influences the more do they flow into him, and the more does he become like the Master whom he serves. It is a matter of steady growth, but this growth is much helped by the constant flow of force between the Master and the pupil. 389. This union is a kind of foretaste on a lower scale of the higher unity that comes when the Buddhic consciousness is fully developed, but short of that development I think there is nothing so close as the relation between pupil and Master. Those who want to be in the privileged position of a pupil should already live as far as they can in the way they will feel it incumbent upon them to live when they do become pupils. The more we can bring that general calmness and serenity of action, feeling and thought into our lives, the more nearly we shall be fit for the closer association when it comes. Unquestionably the way to deserve such a privilege is to live as though we had it even already. I know people often think that the small external things do not matter. They sometimes say, oh, perhaps such and such a thing keeps one back in evolution, but it cannot matter very much, it is such a small thing. I have heard that said about meat eating and smoking. But we are not in a position where we can afford to neglect the slightest thing that is of help. The undertaking before us is one of considerable magnitude, and it is no easy task. That being so, it is not the part of the wise man to neglect even the smallest help. And these things are not small in reality. The Master further says, in his note 390. There is a correspondence between this rule and the 17th of the second series. When after ages of struggle and many victories the final battle is won, the final secret demanded, then you are prepared for a further path. 391. The 17th rule in the second part of the book, to which the Master refers, runs thus: inquire of the inmost, the one, of its final secret, which it holds for you through the ages. That means that just as now we must seek out the higher self, when we have reached that higher level we must seek out the one, the monad. The final secret is always how to do more and higher work. Many persons seem to think that rather a dreary prospect. There are large numbers of people whose great desire is rest. There is so much strain and stress and overwork all about us that they look forward to complete rest. That is a point of view which belongs exclusively to the physical body. On higher planes we are never tired. 1 Anti, Volume 1, Part 3, ch. 2, The One Good Desire. Volume 2 page 216, 347. I have known people who have remained in the astral world for a number of years waiting for a body which the Master thought suitable. In one case a man had to wait 25 years, in another, 20. Both were devoting themselves absolutely without cessation to the Master's work for the whole of that time. Certainly neither of them had the slightest sense of fatigue, nor was he in any way less eager to work at the end of that time. So if there be such a thing as fatigue on the astral plane, it must be far removed beyond any time with which we have to deal. 392. When the final secret of this great lesson is told, in it is opened the mystery of the new way, a path which leads out of all human experience, and which is utterly beyond human perception or imagination. At each of these points it is needful to pause long and consider well. At each of these points it is necessary to be sure that the way is chosen for its own sake. The way and the truth come first, then follows the life. 393, AB. When the liberated soul has completed the stages of progress to arhatship, and is passing onward to the first of the great initiations beyond, he makes a choice from a variety of paths open to him. They are of the sacred number of 7, he has 7 ways of choice before him. 1 Anti, Volume 2, page 217, 375. People often say that at that point there can be only one possibility, that a man must choose to be a master, the underlying idea being that if he decides rightly he will choose to return to help the world. Such a decision recommends itself when humanity itself is thought of, but I must remind you that this is a hasty conclusion. A hint is thrown out as to the nature of the choice, where the note says, at each of these points it is necessary to be sure that the way is chosen for its own sake. The words "own sake" give the key. The choice is to be made for the sake of the way only. The fact that there are more ways than one, ought to prevent our laying down the law as to our choice, still more should it stop any person from using the words, if he chooses rightly, as if any one could choose wrongly when the soul is liberated. 394, Yet an idea, a very subtle one, runs through us, that we can dictate the choice. We sometimes find ourselves choosing for our own future, for the far-off future, what to be and what to do. And that is really the lower consciousness choosing for the higher. This subtle tendency runs through our life. Part of our consciousness feels itself as the I, and naturally inclines to choose the path of the future as it looks at it, forgetting that it is thereby choosing for the higher consciousness, in whose hands alone the choice really lies. Making up your minds as to what is to be done at the close of the arhat stage, would be like a child choosing his profession in life. His selection, not being guided by knowledge, would certainly not be one that his matured judgment would approve. A young child can have no choice as to his career in the future, and it is the same in these matters. The higher ego will choose, without regard to the lower, indeed, the lower will perish before the choice comes. All that is important to put before the lower, then, is the idea of service, of its being made an instrument to serve. Unless it does this, it becomes an obstacle to the higher consciousness. Remember, it can throw obstacles in the way of that consciousness, as has often been said, it crucifies the higher ego. 395. Another thing to remember is that we cannot judge of any stage of consciousness that we have not experienced, and of which we do not know the relative value. When thinking of a higher condition of consciousness that you have not experienced, there is no possibility of your being able to form any judgment about it. When you reach that state, the universe alters for you, bringing about a change in your nature, and causing you to know how such consciousness can act. You must experience this change before you can know. So in forming any opinion as to a path in the future, it is a case of judging a state of consciousness of which you have no knowledge, and your judgment is worthless. 396. Looking at it from a higher standpoint, there is but one thing that decides our choice, and that is the necessity of the world at the time. Where a place is empty, where help is needed, there are the things which decide the choice. Out of the different ways before him, the purified soul will go where help is wanted. Self-determined, he takes that course where help is needed by the hierarchy, for the expression of the will of the Logos. I was told by a great one that it was a blunder to think that choice could be made at all down here, that the choice is always made to give the help which is wanted for the expression of the will of the Logos. 397. One group of workers stands for help in the world. Only when reinforcement is needed amongst them, only when a channel is wanted, would the choice turn to the world's work. I have emphasized this because it was given as a warning to myself, not to let my thoughts turn from useful activity to other lines of work not yet given us to do. In the Bhagavad Gita we are warned that the dharma of another is full of danger, our work lies where our dharma lies. 398, CWL. The path which leads out of all human experience is the path of the adept, which opens up before him with a choice of 7 ways, as we have already seen. I have heard many members say, "Oh, of course there is no question at all about what we should choose, we should remain to serve humanity. It is wiser not to waste our strength in such decisions, because as a matter of fact we do not know anything about it. It is like a little boy making up his mind what he will do when he is a man. He wants to be a pirate or an engine driver. We know as little now about the conditions that will determine our choice as the little child does of those which will determine his future. No one of the 7 paths can possibly be in itself more desirable than another, though they all lead to work of different kinds. 399. Quite surely the idea that will be most prominent when the time of choice comes will be, where can I be of most use? What we might perhaps safely prophesy of our action is that we shall say, "Here am I, Lord. Send me wherever help is most wanted." But even so it may well be that as we unfold we shall develop some special aptitude for one or other of these lines, and thus it will be obviously best for the whole system that we should be used in the line where we can do most good. 400. Whenever a higher level of consciousness is reached, our view of the world is so much widened that it becomes an entirely new thing to us. When we reach adeptship we shall have an immeasurably wider horizon. We shall understand exactly what we are doing because we shall be able to see the solar system as does its maker, from above, instead of from below. We shall see the pattern that is being woven, and what it all means. Every additional step, every extension of consciousness brings us nearer to seeing the meaning of everything, so as we go on we become less and less likely to make mistakes and to misunderstand. But the perfect knowledge can only be that of the adept, whose consciousness has become one with that of the logos of the system, even though it be only as yet in one of his lower manifestations. 401. in any case, that choice is in the hands of the monad, so we certainly need not trouble ourselves about it now. There is always a possibility that the monad may have decided all that even now, and when such a choice is made the lower representatives or parts of him will fall into their place when the time comes, whatever ideas they may previously have been forming. All that is important for us to put before the personality now with regard to such choice is the idea of service. If we can get it to understand that idea of always watching to serve, it will very readily become a perfect channel for the ego, and that will influence the individuality in turn to be a perfect channel or instrument for the monad. Service is the highest ideal in life. Did not the Christ himself say, "Whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant"? 1:1 Matthew 20:27. 402:18. Seek the way by retreating within. 403:19. Seek the way by advancing boldly without. 404, CWL, to seek the way by retreating within means in the beginning to seek out and follow the guidance of the higher self. As has been explained before, the first stage on the Wa3 foot is the unification of the personality with the ego. Later the ego becomes a perfect expression of the monad, and the man is then ready for the Aseka initiation. Beyond that, the adept is striving to raise the consciousness of his monad into the consciousness of the logos. It is always himself at higher and higher levels that he seeks. 405. Whenever a man at any stage tries to pour devotion up into a higher level, such a flood of the divine power descends upon him that it quite overwhelms his effort, and the effect is not so much that he has reached up, as that power has been poured down on him. The same thing happens between the pupil and the master. The pupil sends out his love towards the master, but it is surpassed by the response of the master's love, so that to him it seems that he has received a vast flood of love, though in the first place it was his action that made the downpouring possible. 406, such, at a higher level, is the pouring down upon the adept of the Holy Ghost, the power of the third aspect of the Logos, symbolized in the cloven tongues, like as of fire, of Pentecost. 1 Acts 2:3. Thus in due course the adept becomes one with the third aspect of the Logos manifesting on the nirvanic plane. His next step is to become one with that aspect which is represented by the Christ in the bosom of the Father. Later on, though I know nothing about it, I am quite sure that he will draw ever nearer and nearer to the deity of our solar system. We shall ever approach the light, but we shall never touch the flame. Not that we shall not rise one day to the height where he stands, but he does not stand still to receive us. He also is evolving, and therefore we shall not touch the flame, though we shall ever draw nearer and nearer to it. The wonderful bliss of that experience cannot be described down here, because it is all of a nature which has no counterpart in the lower world. 407, in every man there is much to be found by seeking within. The personality, which most people think of as themselves, is only a very small fraction of the man. We are much larger people than we show ourselves to be. The ego can only put down one small part or facet of himself in a particular incarnation, and even if that part is manifesting perfectly, it is only a small part. A great man is a fine and beautiful thing to see, even down here, but we may be sure that the whole is very much greater than the part which we can see. No one personality could express all the multiplicity of possibilities which lie within the ego, which has within it the essence of the experience of all the lives it has led. The highest and very best of us down here might be taken as a fair average sample of the qualities we should discover in the ego if we were able to see it. 408, we get these samples sometimes, and should try to understand them as such. We often find, for example, quite an ordinary person showing great heroism when a sudden emergence arises. A workman will sacrifice his life to save his fellow man. Now the possibility of doing that shows that the man inside is really at that level. Whatever is the highest a man can touch is in reality the man himself, because he could not touch it, could not think it, if it were not himself. All the lower expression, the storms of passion, the baser feelings, belongs to the personality. They should not be there, that goes without saying, but they are not the real man. If sometimes he touches great heights, that is the level at which he ought always to strive to keep himself. 409. The high and noble things for which a man yearns must be to some extent developed in the ego, otherwise he could not be longing for them down here. The people who do not wish for such ideals are those in whom those particular qualities do not exist even in germ. If we yearn for higher things, they are in us not as a mere possibility but a living fact, and it remains for us to live at our highest level and in that way reach one still higher. The whole object of the ego in putting himself down is that he may become more definite, that all his vaguely beautiful feelings may crystallize into a definite resolution to act. All his incarnations form a process by means of which he may gain precision and definiteness. Therefore specialization is our way of advancement. We come down into each race or subrace in order that we may acquire the qualities for the perfection of which that subrace is working. The fragment of the ego which is put down is highly specialized. It is intended to develop a certain quality, and when that is done the ego absorbs it into himself in due course, and he does that over and over again. The personality scatters something of its special achievement over the whole when it is withdrawn into the ego, so that he thus becomes a little less vague than before. 410. The ego, with all its mighty powers, is very much less accurate than the lower mind, and the personality, valuing above all the discriminating powers of the lower mind which it is intended to develop, often comes in consequence to despise the far higher but vaguer self, and acquires a habit of thinking of itself as independent of the ego. For 11, though the ego is vague in the earlier stages of its evolution and is therefore unsatisfactory to that extent, there is in him nothing that is evil, no moral defect. There is no matter in the causal body which could respond to the lower vibrations, but wherever there is a gap in its development there is always a possibility that the lower vehicles will run into some sort of evil action. It sometimes happens in such a case that when an emergency arises the astral elemental takes possession of the man and he madly stabs another man, or, being in great need of money, he finds himself in some position where he can obtain it dishonestly, and succumbs to the temptation. The ego is then not sufficiently awake to step in and prevent the action, or perhaps he does not understand that the passion or greed of the astral body may force the lower self into the commission of a crime. When we find evil turning up unexpectedly in a man's character we must not think that it comes from the higher self. Yet it comes from a lack in the higher self. Because if the ego were more developed he would check the man on the brink of the evil thought, and the crime would not be committed. 412. To seek the way by retreating within means for us that we must always endeavor to live up to our highest level, so that we may be able to bring down more and more of the treasures which the ego has garnered during innumerable incarnations. But while seeking thus to realize the higher self we must remember that we must also seek the way by advancing without. We cannot afford to be ignorant of what is outside us, and we must do our best to study and to become acquainted with the world and what is going on in it. Chapter 9. Rule 20. 413:20. Seek it not by any one road. To each temperament there is one road which seems the most desirable. But the way is not found by devotion alone, by religious contemplation alone, by ardent progress, by self-sacrificing labor, by studious observation of life. None alone can take the disciple more than one step onwards. All steps are necessary to make up the ladder. 414 AB, Rule 20 is the comment by the Chohan on the three short aphorisms 17 to 19, which were considered in the last chapter. It tells us that a man has not to develop only on that line where he finds the least resistance, but must unfold his powers on every line before he reaches the universal goal of usefulness. His aim is to be a perfect instrument of the good law, and no man can become that unless he grows along every line. Each type or temperament must therefore supply what is lacking in itself before perfection can be achieved. Humanity reaches the goal not by devotion, nor by religious contemplation, nor by self-sacrificing labor, nor by observation and deep thought alone. Ultimately we shall all need to have all these things, but while on the way people are limited by their temperaments, and for a long time to come the work of each disciple in helping humanity is likely to be limited chiefly to one of these ways. 415, it is clear why we must master all the ways. As men advance they must draw nearer together, must become welded into an organic whole. So if a man possessed great power of religious contemplation, but very little of the other powers, it would be of little use for him to come into contact with a man possessing chiefly the quality of self-sacrificing labor. He could not meet him on that ground, and that would limit his usefulness. So it is desirable that while the disciple is striving to perfect himself on his special line of work, is seeking to learn everything about something, he should at the same time not neglect to learn something about everything, so as to be able to make full contact with people of different temperaments with whom he must work. For 16, the keynote is balance. We must be able to work to some extent on all lines. Toleration also is wanted, that we may be able to help all. We must see each man's way as right for him, as one of the roads leading onwards it has to be recognized as good. We must have respect for all types of people, and until we are able to help them all ourselves we should try to guide those whom we cannot help, to others who can help them, and not disparage the roads on which they are going, and seek to turn them into our own. For 17, CWL, people are almost always lopsided in their development. Some are strong in devotion, some in intellect, some along the line of work. Each man, according to his temperament, is taken naturally along the line which is easiest for him, yet he must not forget that all-round development is necessary before he can reach adeptship. The adept is above all things an all-round man, and if we are putting him before us as an ideal, we must do what we can to develop ourselves in various directions. It is a fine thing to be full of devotion, but we must have knowledge along with it, because the man who is merely blindly devoted is of little use. The converse is true of those who advance by intellect. They must also take care to acquire devotion, otherwise their intellectual development will lead them astray. It is better to develop along one line than not to develop at all, but while every man should pursue his own line, he should nevertheless remember that there are other lines. Often the tendency is to criticize other paths, and to feel that they may be less useful than our own. They would be less useful to us, perhaps, but are not at all so to those who are following them. Wherever we may be at present in our development we shall certainly have to become balanced, so if now we appreciate only the idea of work we shall nevertheless presently have to realize the position of the man who advances by wisdom, and again that of him who progresses by devotion, and not allow ourselves to think them less immediately useful than we are. I am afraid that the people who advance by devotion are often a little intolerant of those who wish to study and to work. They sometimes say, all that you are doing belongs to the outer plane or to the purely intellectual side of things, whereas the heart side of everything is always the more important, and if you neglect that you can make no real progress. It is perfectly true that the heart side must be developed, but nevertheless there are those who advance best through definite work, and others who cannot evoke from themselves the best that is within them without careful study and full understanding. For 18, men sometimes feel drawn to the higher life, and devote themselves to contemplation only. There are occultists who hold that to be the best way, at least in the early stages. A man might say, I must first develop myself in order that I may be able to serve. When I am an adept I shall serve perfectly, I shall make no mistakes. But there is work to do at all levels, and the man who has qualified as an adept has to work at very much higher levels than any we can reach. Therefore if we wait until adeptship is attained before we are willing to work for the world, a great deal of the lower work will in the meantime be left undone. Our masters are working chiefly on the nirvanic level, on the egos of men by the million. They are doing at that higher level what we could not do, but there is a very great deal to do on the lower planes which we can do. 419. People have sometimes been disposed to think that the masters ought to be doing this lower work, that they should, for example, be working with individuals down here. I have explained before that they do not do that, except in the comparatively rare cases of those who they see will very shortly repay them for their effort. It is so entirely a case of what is best for the work that no sentiment of any sort enters into the matter at all. They will work with a pupil if he can do good work in return. And if the amount of energy spent in teaching and guiding him will produce more result in that way in a given time than would be produced by the same amount of energy expended along higher and wider lines. That is, only if the man is apt to learn, and prepared to do a great deal himself whenever opportunity offers. Up to that point their interest in him would be what one might call a general concern. 420. There is much work to be done at these lower levels, and it is a fact that a great amount and variety of it has not been done previously. New ways of service are constantly being opened up as mankind advances in brotherhood. Our masters had many pupils before the Theosophical Society came into existence, but most of them were Orientals, chiefly Hindus and Buddhists, Sufis and Zoroastrians. The trend of the Oriental mind is not quite the same as ours. I think without offense we may say it is less practical in some directions than ours, and the majority of Indian pupils have occupied themselves chiefly with their own studies, of which they had an immense amount to do. And only when they had advanced a considerable way on that line did they then turn aside to help others. They had not the incentive that we have for the work of the invisible helpers. Nobody in India, not even a coolie, is quite as ignorant as the average Christian about after-death states, so there is not the same need for rescuing them from the delusions created by the idea of eternal hell. As soon as our students began to see what astral work involved they realized that there was a crying need for help. Here were people by the thousands suffering intensely from a nightmare, a sort of bogey, which they had made for themselves simply on account of foolish teaching. A sight of that kind urges one at once to make some effort to relieve all that distress. Consequently the work of the invisible helpers began, and increased like a rolling snowball. Every one who is helped sets to work to help others, so it has happened that in about 35 years, since the work was regularly taken in hand, the effect produced has been very great indeed. 421. A man may reach great heights by attending only to his own development, but along that line he will not reach adeptship. The man who waits to attain adeptship before he serves the world will never be an adept. He may escape into nirvana, or obtain liberation, but because he has not realized what the Logos wants of him, he will presently be overtaken by numbers of less advanced and less talented people who have realized that one important thing. Then he will have to give up his life on higher planes and come back to learn what he has not learnt before, that humanity is one, and that a man who does not realize that fact cannot scale the loftiest heights of progress. 422. But, as is said here, self-sacrificing labor alone is not sufficient to gain for the man the highest development. He also needs to develop his devotion, and above all to develop his power of response to the inner light, because without that he will not be a perfect instrument. Without that he might be working away most energetically, but would be unable to respond to the touch, the hint from above, sufficiently quickly. He would need, as it were, to be pulled round energetically, instead of requiring just a gentle touch, which is all that should be necessary, and so would cause more trouble to his master in training him. He must also learn something of the great plan, because, glorious as the work is, the man cannot do it perfectly unless he has knowledge. Therefore he must make a definite effort in the way of study to attain that. Much knowledge comes in actually doing the work, but there is every reason for us to take advantage of the accumulated experience of our forerunners and learn whatever we can by study, so that our work may be better done. 423. The vices of men become steps in the ladder, one by one, as they are surmounted. The virtues of men are steps indeed, necessary, not by any means to be dispensed with. Yet, though they create a fair atmosphere and a happy future, they are useless if they stand alone. For 24, AB, here both vices and virtues are called steps. This broad view cannot harm students, and is indeed necessary for the disciple, but it would be right in the world to take the narrow view, for vice must mean vices, and virtue must mean virtues, to undeveloped people. The broad view would confuse their ideas of morality. They cannot apply principles with understanding, and think of the moral bearing of each action, so they must have a list of things that are bad, for their avoidance, a set of religious and social commandments for their guidance. It would be a mistake to upset the popular view of vice and virtue, although it permits many actions the disciple has outgrown. For 25, but esotericists should learn to understand what they both mean, as manifestations of the divine. The way to regard it is to think of every soul as a divine being, as a center of outgoing energies pouring into the world. The life of man consists in the expression of the life of Atma, and it finds expression outwards. In the earlier stages of its evolution there was nothing to be called vice or virtue, but simply an outrush of energies, very largely along lines which the standards achieved by society today would not approve. It is true that from the beginning of our human career most of us, especially those who had individualized at a high point from the animal kingdom, were in a position to use our intelligence to some extent. And so were able to learn many things by observation of others. But it remains a fact that nevertheless all of us in earlier stages must have done many things which would now be accounted evil. Those experiences taught us to do better, so they were steps or means of progress. And they also help to make it possible for us to understand and help others who are going through such experiences now. All types of experiences are equally necessary. We could not know even partly what they are without every kind of expression, and should never be able to help other people if we did not understand. For 26, in former times we may have been murderers or drunkards. If these things have been our particular experience, we now know them as wrong because we did them before we knew better, and found that their results brought suffering. At a further stage we learned that such things delay our progress, and are therefore wrong, but without some experience we should never have realized this consciously. No amount of advice could have given us the vivid knowledge we have gained from experience. Having learned our lesson along one line we never again under any stress of temptation make that particular mistake. You would never be safe if there were any possibility of your falling. You must have conscious knowledge of these things, the typical thing you have to know, the fundamental experience you must have, if you wish to be safe and helpful. 427. CWL, here again the Chohan reminds us that the object of occult training is not to produce merely good men, but great spiritual powers who can work intelligently for the Logos. Moral goodness is certainly a prerequisite, but it is useless alone. For 28, when a man begins his evolution in the quite primitive stage he has no ideas of right and wrong, so we could hardly speak of him as having vices and virtues. The salvage is after all nothing more than a center of outrushing energy, the irresponsible kind of outrush of which we see so much in the lower kingdoms. A creature like a fly has a very tiny body, but it is a mass of energy which is terrible as compared with its size. Imagine an entity of our own size endowed with as much energy in proportion and as little idea of what to do with it, it would be a terrible, wild thing, a source of danger to all around. For 29, the savage has that kind of energy. It bursts out in fighting and in lusts of all kinds, which are certainly vices from our point of view, although we are hardly justified in regarding them as such in him. He does not murder from any sort of unholy, vitiated pleasure in murder, as has happened with people of higher races. He certainly has a kind of pride in being able to dominate and kill other people, and in that way he works off a vast amount of energy which, many thousands of years later, will be directed into useful channels. He has to learn how to handle that energy, how to let it run through him without doing hurt to himself or others, but that is a matter of long training and development, and of gaining control of the vehicles by the ego. 430. We see the same thing at a very much higher stage working out in the case of an immensely powerful man, an American millionaire of the old type, for example, who made a great amount of money very often by ruining other people. He was doing a very wicked thing, but he was developing tremendous powers of concentration and generalship. Having learned in that position how to do all this and how to manage his fellow men, he might perhaps in another life be a general of an army. Very likely at first he would use his generalship as Napoleon did, for his own advancement and to gratify his ambition. Later on he would learn to use his powers for the service of his fellow men. In that way it is clear that the very vices of men are steps on the way to something higher and better. The advance from vice to virtue is very largely a matter of learning to control our energies and directing them aright. We begin to transmute our vices into virtues and we realize that the energy which is going so to waste and doing so much harm might be applied for good purposes. Each time an evil quality is finally conquered, it is changed into the opposite virtue, and so becomes a definite step raising us higher in evolution. For 31, the whole nature of man must be used wisely by the one who desires to enter the way. For 32, ab, the word way here means the real spiritual life. Man is a spiritual being, so in living the spiritual life he is being his true self. If he would tread that way he must use all his faculties and powers, the whole of himself. What man is in his essence, that he becomes in truth, a manifestation of the divine. When the disciple is at a certain stage he is told, "Thou art the path." Before this time his master is to him his path, he sees the divine manifesting in the master, but when the divine in him manifests, he himself is the path. He becomes the path in proportion as he advances. Therefore the whole nature of the man is to be used wisely. When that is done the divine fragment, with the help of the thing which he has created for his own use, may unfold its latent powers into active and positive life. 433. The words, divine fragment, are not used merely as a poetic phrase, they contain a truth we cannot afford to forget, which any other words would be inadequate to express. The same idea is found in the Catechism quoted in the Secret Doctrine 1 op. Cit, Volume 1, page 145, where the Guru asks the pupil what he sees. He sees countless sparks, which appear as though detached. The ignorant look upon them as separate, but by the wise they are seen as one flame. Such a fragment, inasmuch as it is a center of consciousness, is a point without magnitude, it cannot be separate. All centers are fundamentally one, since there is only one ultimate sphere, one universe. But the mystery of the unity of being cannot be understood below the nirvanic plane. It cannot be expressed in the lower worlds, and all attempts to symbolize it must be imperfect. For 34, the divine fragment is the monad, which is reproduced in the triple spirit on the nirvanic plane. Their Atma is threefold, and it puts down one of its powers into the Buddhic and another into the mental plane. It contains the possibilities of the Logos, but is at first quite incapable of expressing them. Atma pouring itself forth appears in Manas as the individualizing principle, the I-making faculty that gives rise to individuality in time, as the opposite to eternity. It draws round it matter to express itself on the upper Manasic plane, and thus creates as its vehicle the causal body, which lasts throughout the long series of human incarnations. That is the body created with pain, by means of which the man purposes to develop. For 35, think of Atma as pouring itself forth onto the third plane downwards, the Manasic plane. It draws around itself matter of the highest level of that plane, and forms the causal body. That body is then its vehicle for the expression of the Manasic aspect of itself on that plane. It is Manas working through the causal body. This Manas becomes dual in incarnation. It reaches down into the lower levels of the mental plane, and forms there a vehicle, the lower Manas, which in turn builds the astral body. In its turn that provides the force which builds the etheric and physical bodies. Each body on its own plane is a means for gathering experience, which when suitable is handed on to that which formed the vehicle. So after the personal incarnation is over the lower Manas hands on to the causal body all the experience that it has gained, and the personality perishes. The causal body takes whatever experiences are of a nature to help its growth, and they remain with it through all its future incarnations. For 36, the causal body also has a relation to what is above it. What happens on the inner or upper side of that vehicle is the passing on into the third aspect of Atma of the essence of all experiences which may have entered into it. What is thus poured into the Manasic aspect of Atma renders it capable of acting without the causal body, that is, without a permanent vehicle which limits it. 437. The student who thinks this out, will find that it will throw light on the perishing of the individuality. The same idea appears in the Hindu and Buddhist scriptures. The causal body is the individuality, that which persists throughout the cycle of incarnation. It comes into existence at a certain period of time, it has to perish at another period. It is born and it dies. As the Gita says, certain is death for the born 1 op. Cit. 2, 27. This is true not only in the outer world, but in the widest sense. As there is birth of the causal body, so must it perish. It is the thing which the divine fragment has built for himself with much pain. It is the I to the disciple. In some the I is thought of as even lower, in the personality, but this is the I which has to be reached at the beginning of the path. It is finally transcended at the close of the Arhat stage of growth, at the real liberation. Up to that time it is diminishing and changing in character as the Arhat grows. It will ultimately be found to be a defective I, not the real I at all, but at this stage of human evolution any attempt to describe its future condition would be misleading. 438. The disciple rightly puts before himself, as his aim, the realization and purification of the individuality. It is a thing created for the use of its creator. Sometimes it is technically called a creature. Then we hear of the man, the true man, meeting his creature. So also the individual, the creature, meets his own creator. This meeting occurs only in a high stage of evolution. When a man meets his creature he is perfect and transcends individuality. 439, the creation of the individuality takes place at a lower stage, the man is busy building it up for a very long time. The less evolved members of humanity are for a long period shut up in their lower vehicles, that is necessary for their progress, before the individual is fully built, so the causal body remains an unconscious shell for a long time. While activities are busy in the personality. Think of the ages taken in building the physical vehicle, think of the rounds and the stages that the Pitris went through on the moon chain before becoming fit to pass into human evolution. There is an immense difference in the time that human beings take in building the individual, though all take long. The building goes on more rapidly in the higher stages under the inspiration of the more evolved ego than in the lower stages. When the intelligence reaches a high stage it is utilizing higher forces and learning not to waste them, and then the building goes on with immense rapidity. This gives us great encouragement. For in looking back to the moon chain and thinking of the time we have taken to advance, it would seem very long if it had to be repeated, but looking forward we see that progress may become almost incredibly swift. 440. The divine fragment can do nothing by itself, all its development must come by contact with outside forces, and through the vehicles, it cannot grow without them. As H.P.B. said, spirit is senseless on the lower planes. It cannot bring forth any power without a vehicle of expression on the plane in which it has to act. Further it can only have control of the vehicles when they are perfected. The work of bringing the vehicles to perfection develops the powers of the spirit to perfection, so the two developments go on together. And when that work is complete, spirit has in itself the power to disintegrate its individual vehicles the moment it leaves them, and to reintegrate them in a moment when it chooses to do so. 441, think of the perfected spiritual beings. Only while they were evolving at and below our human stage were vehicles necessary for their growth, but when such a one, having drawn all the experiences of that evolution into his essence, wishes to manifest. He can at any time create what he wants for manifestation, and after having utilized the forces of the plane, can withdraw the vehicle again. When speaking of the planetary spirits, H.P.B. mentions that they have come through humanity. They could not appear as helpers if they had not through the human stages drawn up into their essence the experience necessary. Thus beings exist who may not be manifest, but who can manifest themselves, by drawing from their essence the experience they require and creating a vehicle in which to work. 442. It is not difficult to understand how the vehicles are for their own use. As we advance we rise above the bondage of each vehicle manifesting outwardly, and learn to use it only for the higher work, without any consideration of self. Doing this as far as the physical body is concerned should be the disciple's daily practice. The physical body must be mastered so that it cannot throw its own reflection upon you. It exists only for you to use, and you must learn to control it completely, so that it cannot compel you to attend to any experience that you do not want. It should be only an instrument for use. You are training it to hand on its experience to the ego. There will come a time when you no longer want to hand on any experience at all, then the I takes what it wants for its own purpose. This is a high condition to reach, for it is the stage of the adept. 443, in the secret doctrine it is said that a master's body is illusory. That means only that the physical body cannot affect or disturb him. The forces playing around cannot influence him through it, except in so far as he allows them. They cannot throw him off his center. HPB has also said that a master's physical body is a mere vehicle. It hands nothing on, but is simply a point of contact with the physical plane, a body kept as an instrument needed for the work he does, and dropped when done with. The same thing is true of the astral and mental bodies. When the causal body becomes an instrument only, the individuality perishes, Atma having acquired the power of manifesting its third aspect on the mental plane at will, and no longer needing a permanent vehicle thereon. 444, CWL. This statement seems at first sight to contradict some of the earlier ones. For example, we were told to kill out desire, to kill out various parts of ourselves. It is said in the voice of the silence that the pupil must learn to slay the lunar form 1 Anti, Volume 1, Part 1, Ch2, Initiation and the Approach thereto. Volume 2, p. 128, at will, to get rid of his astral body. The words, at will, give us the key to the expression. We must not destroy the astral body, because if we did so we should become monsters, with great mental development but without any sympathy. Many people find emotion a great trouble to them because it overwhelms them, but they must try not to destroy it, but to purify and control it. It must be a force which we can use and not something which overwhelms us. We must not kill it out, because without it we could never understand emotion in others, and we could therefore never help people who are along that line, but it must be refined and all self must be weeded out from it. 445. In the same way the intellectual people must not destroy intellect, but must bridle it and guide it. It is quite true that intellect like devotion may run away with people. They do not always realize that. They say that the intellect in itself is a guarantee against anything extreme, but I am afraid it is not. Many people make a kind of god of intellect. They say, our reason is the only thing we have to guide us and we must always follow that out to its logical conclusion. That would be quite true if all their premises were always right to begin with, but usually they are remarkably deficient. They are generally considering the physical side of the problem only and leaving out of account the far more important hidden side, and therefore their conclusions are inevitably wrong. As I said before, we must be balanced. We must learn to see all sides of a question, and we must endeavor to avoid developing any one quality, however good, to such excess that it is altogether out of proportion to all the other qualities. Because often the most admirable quality may become dangerous if it is taken in that way apart from the whole. The man who possesses keen intellect is much to be congratulated because of that intellectual development, but all the more if he has that should he be careful that the other side, that of love and sympathy, is not neglected nor forgotten. 446. In exactly the same way those who possess the power of love and sympathy must see to it that they develop the intellectual side of their natures, so that they will not be led away by their sympathy into foolish action which will not help, but hinder. A person with the keenest sympathy but no knowledge is often perfectly helpless, just as many a man would be in the presence of some sad accident, lacking the knowledge which a doctor would have. Many people, though full of sympathy and anxious to help, do not know what to do, and the efforts which they make, if ignorant, may be just as likely to do harm as good. Very clearly, there is the need of knowledge as well as emotion. 447. Emotion is the driving force in our natures. It is said in the old Indian books that the emotions are the horses, but the mind is the guide, the mind takes the reins, therefore we need to develop both. We must have our horses, because they are the means of progress, our storage of force, but we must also have reasonable guidance, or else they will run away with us. All that is perpetually inculcated in all occult study, yet it cannot be said too often, because people forget. There are always those who develop one side only and are sadly lacking in the other, and that is one of the ways in which even an advanced person may come to grief. 448. Each man is to himself absolutely the way, the truth, and the life. But he is only so when he grasps his whole individuality firmly, and by the force of his awakened spiritual will, recognizes this individuality as not himself, but that thing which he has with pain created for his own use and by means of which he purposes, as his growth slowly develops his intelligence, to reach to the life beyond individuality. When he knows that for this his wonderful complex, separated life exists, then, indeed, and then only, he is upon the way. 449, CWL. The way, meaning the true spiritual life, can only be found after the experience of building up the individuality. The expression used here by the Venetian master, that complex thing which man has built with much trouble and pain for his own use, is true of the individuality, and again, of each personality. The individuality itself is so built by the monad. It builds in turn its various personalities, but all for the use of the higher, and for that alone. The mistake all men make is that of identifying themselves with the lower nature, and allowing it to delude them into supposing that it is the I, instead of which the I is in reality the monad far behind, which is using all these vehicles. 450. The whole evolution of man can be stated as a withdrawing into himself, but always bringing his sheaves with him, never returning empty-handed. This process of handing up the result of experience by the lower to the higher is going on at all levels all the time. There are many ways in which we are doing that in everyday life, only we do not think of it in that light. For example, we know how to read. We gained that power in this incarnation by passing very slowly through a long process of learning. Now we can take up a book and understand its meaning at once, without having to think of being able to read. We have forgotten the details of that experience, and it would be of no value to us to remember them. Some of us have learned to read music, and can play it off at sight, but at first when we were learning we bad to look carefully at each note and then look down at the piano to find it. Now the fact that we had to pass through all that labor is forgotten. We do not need to remember all the separate music lessons in order to be able to play, which was the object of the whole process. 451. It is just the same with the memory of past lives. People who believe in reincarnation often have a sense of resentment at the back of their minds, because they do not remember that for which they are now suffering, even while they are ready to admit that it is the result of wrongdoing in the past. That feeling is perhaps quite natural, but it really does not matter in the least. The soul does know, and has made a note of that which has brought the evil result, and will do all it can to influence the personality so as to prevent the same mistake from occurring again. 452. People think it would simplify their lives if the personality could remember all those past incarnations. In some ways it might, but I think that if in the personality we had the full remembrance of all our past lives before we had reached adeptship, it would do more harm than good. In the first place, we have not the power to weigh all these things calmly. We should find it distinctly depressing to look back at the ghastly crimes we had committed in the past lives. I have long ago learned how to look back at my own past lives, but it is by no means a pleasure to do so. There are certain beautiful actions, some fine incidents in the past lives of everyone, and one is able to look back with a certain degree of pleasure on those. But we have found that in looking back upon a past life the thing that immediately strikes one most forcibly is the number of opportunities which one did not see. Here, there, everywhere, we were surrounded by opportunities, and we cannot help feeling amazed that we took advantage of so few of them. It was not, usually, that we failed to take them because we did not want to do so. Our intentions were good, though rather feebly good, perhaps, and if we had seen the opportunities we should have taken them. Now we look back and wonder at our own blindness. We say, if only I had taken this or that course of action certain results would have followed, and by this time I might have reached adeptship. But we did not. When we rise to that level the power to look back will be useful to us, but with the amount of intellect and free will we have now it would certainly not be an unmixed pleasure. 453, let us consider the general principles involved. The whole of this scheme of which we are a part is intended to further the evolution of man, therefore there can be no doubt whatever that if it were best for him that a personality should remember all his past lives, most certainly that would have been so arranged. As that has not been done, we should at least have faith enough to see that it is best as it is. When a man has the power to look back, he also gains with it a wider insight and a more balanced view of things. And by that time he is so imbued with the certainty of justice in the scheme that if he cannot see exactly how a result followed from its cause, he will say, "Well, I do not see the reason for this, but I am sure I shall do so presently." It would not occur to him to think that he had been unjustly treated. The person who is always talking of being unjustly treated and is perpetually accusing high heaven of neglecting him, does not understand the rudiments of the case. We know that the law is absolutely just as the law of gravitation, but it does not follow that we can always tell exactly how it will work itself out. For 54, as I have said, the ego makes a note of that which produces evil results. Warned by past experience, he tries to influence the personality before it becomes so strong, so definite and decided that it will not be guided by the vaguer touch from the ego behind. It distinctly thinks that it knows best along its own line. Very often it declines to be helped from above, and so the ego cannot influence it to the full extent that he would like. But he tries to gain control, and as we go on we shall feel this higher self more and more endeavoring to take the reins. If we will identify ourselves with him, we shall find that then he can do very much more for us. His chief difficulty is the fact that the average personality identifies itself with the lower vehicles and rather resents his interference, but if it can be persuaded to identify itself with him, then at once the whole difficulty is very much lessened. For 55, when in addition to this there is complete control of the astral and mental bodies, progress may be swift indeed. Normally, when the ego wants to deal with one thing through his lower vehicles, they persist in bringing in 100 others, in sending in reports which are not asked for and not desired by the ego. Control of the mind has to be gained so that it will report to the ego only what he wants to know. Then, when the ego turns some problem over to his mind, and says, "Think that out and give me the information I want," the controlled mind obeys perfectly. Whereas under similar circumstances the average mind reports 100 things which are useless to the ego, because all sorts of wandering thoughts break in and assert themselves. For 56, the system of yielding up the results of the lower work, but not the detailed experience, is going on all the time until we attain adeptship. As the ego develops, the first decided change that the man makes is to draw up the intellect, the manas, to the Buddhic level. He still remains triple, but instead of being on the three planes he is now on two, with Atma developed on its own plane, Buddhi on its own plane, and Manas level with Buddhi, drawn up into the intuition. Then he discards the causal body because he has no further need of it. When he wishes to come down and manifest on the mental plane again, he has to make a new causal body, but otherwise he does not need one. 457. Much in the same way those two manifestations on the Buddhic plane, the Buddhi and the glorified intellect which is intuition, will be drawn up presently into the nirvanic or atmic plane. And the triple spirit on that plane will be fully vivified. Then the three manifestations will converge into one. That is a power within the reach of the adept, because he unifies the monad and the ego, just as the disciple is trying to unite the ego with the personality. 458. This drawing up of the higher manas from the causal body, so that it is on the Buddhic plane side by side with the Buddhi, is the aspect or condition of the ego which Madame Blavatsky called the spiritual ego. It is difficult to work out the comparisons in detail with the state through which the Christian mystics describe themselves as having passed, because they approach it from so different a point of view. But that condition seems to correspond with what they used to call spiritual illumination, that is, the state of the Arhat. It is the unfolding of the Christ principle. We speak of the birth of the Christ principle when there is the first stirring of the Buddhic consciousness in the man, but when it is said the Christ is fully unfolded within him, I think it must mean this state. 459. When people once reach some of these higher levels, the rate of their progress is very greatly increased. I remember once being asked in India whether a man's progress on the path might be measured by arithmetical progression. I replied, I think when once progress is definitely started it is very much more like geometrical progression. That was rather doubted. The Indians seemed to feel that that was an extreme statement, so I asked the Master Kuthumi whether geometrical progression would be a fair statement of the progress of one who had entered upon the path. No, he said, that would not be a fair statement. When once a person enters upon the path, if he converges all his energies upon it, his progress will be neither by arithmetical nor geometrical progression, but by powers. So it would not be in the ratio 2, 4, 8, 16, etc., but as 2, 4, 16, 256, etc. That throws a very different light on the matter, and we begin to see that what is before us is not so impossible and not so wearisome as it sometimes seems. We have taken all these thousands of years to reach our present stage, and it does not seem a great achievement when we consider the time spent upon it. If our future evolution were to be equally slow, the mind would fall back appalled before the contemplation of the eons needed for us to reach the goal. It is encouraging to think that when we definitely begin to tread the path we make progress with very great rapidity indeed. 460. I suppose that the average good person is devoting 100th part of his mind to making himself a little better. Many people are not doing even that. We who are studying and trying to live by the principles of occultism have gone further, and are beginning to devote a reasonable part of our time to it. When once the stage is reached where all our force and thought is concentrated upon this great task, we shall go ahead by leaps and bounds. However backward we are now, when we can devote all our powers to the work to be done, we shall be able to do it much more perfectly than now seems at all possible. 461. Seek it by plunging into the mysterious and glorious depths of your own inmost being. Seek it by testing all experience, by utilizing the senses in order to understand the growth and meaning of individuality, and the beauty and obscurity of those other divine fragments which are struggling side by side with you, and form the race to which you belong. Seek it by study of the laws of being, the laws of nature, the laws of the supernatural, and seek it by making the profound obeisance of the soul to the dim star that burns within. Steadily, as you watch and worship, its light will grow stronger. Then you may know you have found the beginning of the way. And when you have found the end, its light will suddenly become the infinite light. For 62, AB, in this comment we again consider the triple method of seeking the way. 463. A division may be made for purposes of classification, by taking the laws of nature as covering the world of phenomena, the world of observation, the laws of supernature as those of the higher manas and buddhi, and the laws of being as those of the real existence of nirvana. By the laws of nature we then mean the laws which work on the physical and astral planes and the rupa subplanes of manas. For 64, the laws that are above these, but below those of being, may be called the laws of supernature. This includes both the arupa planes of manas and the buddhic plane. That is the region where life expresses itself more than form, where matter is subordinated to life, altering at every moment. There is nothing there to represent a definitely outlined entity. The entity changes form with every change of thought. Matter is an instrument of his life and is no expression of himself. The form is made momentarily, it changes with every change of his life. This is true on the arupa plane of manas, and also in a subtle way on the buddhic plane. It is true also of the spiritual ego, which is buddhi plus the manasic aspect of the one, which was drawn up into buddhi when the causal vehicle was cast aside. That state is called by Christian mystics that of spiritual illumination. It is the stage of the arhat, of the Christ in man. For 65, the word supernatural is commonly used to cover anything that cannot be explained by the common experience of the world. Anything that appears irregular or out of accord with the laws of nature has been so ticketed, much to the confusion of thoughtful people. There is a widespread revolt in the world against all that is called supernatural. People feel that there cannot be anything supernatural, because there is no irregularity or disorder in nature, no region where law does not exist. The law is working everywhere and it is one. As above, so below, is the universal truth. One nature is expressing itself in different ways, but is itself the same always. But when we come to what is here called supernatural, we arrive at a state beyond all that can be touched by the senses, even using the term in its fullest meaning. We pass altogether beyond everything which is phenomenal, into the spiritual worlds themselves. For 66, the plane of Atma, beyond that, is Nirvana, the region of being, where all is reality, where true consciousness resides. We are to seek this way by study of our inmost being. Not until we can reach the nirvanic plane in higher meditation can we get a touch of true Atmic consciousness, but it may be sought for. We begin to search for it by trying to realize its existence. Think of it as in a region where all is reality, where all limitations have vanished, where unity is recognized. In meditation try to imagine it, try to figure it to yourself. You can only do so by a series of negatives. You think, is it phenomenal? It is not so. Is it intellectual? It is not so. You seek it by eliminating what it is not. You then say, it is not a thing that the senses can perceive. It is not what the intelligence can imagine, it is not found even by the illuminated intelligence, with its vast extent, and so on. For 67, it may be asked, why seek it by what it is not, if you can have a touch of Atmic consciousness? Frankly speaking, it is not Atmic consciousness you get in the brain, but a little vibration from the Manasic aspect of Atma differing from any other vibration in the Manasic consciousness. Vibrations started on higher planes are different from those that begin on the Manasic plane. When a person attains to the highest stage of the path proper, the fourth or Arhat path, then, in meditation out of the body, he can pass into Samadhi and reach the Atmic consciousness in Nirvana. 468, CWL. This twofold triple division, of the methods by which we are to seek the way and the laws which correspond with those methods, is illuminating and without a doubt intentional. Plunging into the depths of one's inmost being leads to the study of the laws of being, the laws of that plane which lies beyond all that is manifestation for us, that is to say, Nirvana. The higher planes are, of course, still planes of manifestation, and even what lies beyond them is not really unmanifested, but it is so to us, at our present stage. Only by study of the laws of being shall we be able to fulfill the real purpose of plunging into the depths of our inmost being, which is to make obeisance to the dim star which burns within. Clearly that is a very high stage in development, when we look for the Atma and follow only that. 469. The testing of all experience corresponds with the study of the laws of nature, that is to say, the laws of the phenomenal world, those which work on the physical, astral and mental planes into which the personality plunges. Then we are to learn to understand the individuality by the study of the laws of the supernatural, by which evidently are meant the laws of those worlds in which the ego, as such, moves, that is to say, the laws of the Buddhic plane and the higher part of the mental plane. Of course there is nothing supernatural, but that word is used here evidently in a somewhat technical sense. Through all the planes it is the one life which expresses itself in different ways, and there is no break of natural law and order in the whole scheme. Only when we come to a region beyond anything that any of our physical, astral or mental senses can touch, are we reaching up into something beyond the nature which most of us know, where other and wider laws operate. I think it is in that sense that the Chohan uses this word, supernatural. Beyond the sphere of these senses we pass into a region above the phenomenal, to what the Greeks called the noumenal world, which is the source and cause of the phenomenal worlds. So the meaning of this passage appears to be that when we thoroughly understand the personality we shall have grasped the laws of nature. When we are seeking to understand the individuality, we shall be dealing with the laws of the supernatural, and when, beyond that, we try to realize the Atma, we shall be studying the laws of being. 470. The differences at these levels are sufficiently great to warrant such a classification. On the physical plane everything depends very much upon its form, and that is also true in the astral and lower mental worlds. At the level of the causal body, though it is not quite true that we are without form, at least the forms are different and more direct. The thought of the causal body is like a flash of lightning darting directly to its object. Instead of making a definite separated form, it is simply an outrush, straight, to the object, of the impulse which the thought has given. 471. When we rise above that to the Buddhic we reach a condition which, as I have explained before, can hardly be described in words. There the thought of each person is a pulsation of the whole plane, so that every person at that level enfolds within himself the thought of all the others and can learn from it and can experience through it, as it were. One cannot hope to make it very clear, one can only suggest. For 72, it is well for us to try to understand those higher states. Almost the only way in which we can do this is by the method adopted in the Hindu books, which is always a negation. They do not describe a state of consciousness, they gradually eliminate all the things that it is not. After doing that, if we can manage to retain a sort of sublimated essence of the thought of the thing, we are coming a little nearer to what it really is. The followers of the Buddha often asked, "What is nirvana?" Or sometimes they would say, "Is nirvana, or is it not?" That is to say, has it an existence, or has it not? The Buddha on one occasion answered, "Nirvana is. Beyond a doubt it exists, and yet if you ask me if it is, I can only say that it is neither a state of being nor of not being in the sense in which you understand those words." Perhaps even he could not make it clear to us at our level. In our own far smaller way we have the same kind of experience. I can bear witness that when one develops the Buddhic consciousness and uses it, much which we now cannot make clear becomes absolutely plain. But the moment one drops back from that condition of consciousness one can no longer express that which one has understood. That it is not readily to be expressed is shown by the fact that the Buddha himself, so very much greater, was yet unable to put it into words to be understood down here, except by negatives. Chapter 10. The Note on Rule 20. For 73, AB, the Master Hilarion adds the following note to Rule 20. For 74, seek it by testing all experiences. And remember that when I say this I do not say, yield to the seductions of sense in order to know it. Before you have become an occultist you may do this, but not afterwards. When you have chosen and entered the path you cannot yield to these seductions without shame. Yet you can experience them without horror, can weigh, observe, and test them, and wait with the patience of confidence for the hour when they shall affect you no longer. 475. In the earlier stages of human evolution the ego is not sufficiently developed to know right from wrong. But the moment he has learned to distinguish between them, to know them as different, morality begins. When, for example, he begins to understand the difference between destroying life and guarding it, there is for him the birth of morality on that line. The kind of experience which taught him that knowledge is then not wanted any longer. But though the man no longer needs to test that experience, there is still sometimes a rush of the senses, compelling him to some wrong action, and that afterwards causes him to suffer, because he recognizes that it was wrong to yield to it. The saying of the pseudo-occultist, that a man may do wrong in order to gain experience, is never justified. When an act is done while a man is unconscious of its being wrong he is gaining necessary experience. But when there is knowledge that it is wrong, then each yielding means a fall, and keen suffering must follow. For 76, the condition of yielding under stress of circumstances lasts for many lives. Even after a man has entered on the path the conflict with the desires of the senses often continues. Before one can make rapid progress there are long stages of conflict between the wish that works through the astral and mental bodies, and the knowledge that its gratification is a hindrance to the higher life. The conflict on the lower stages is long, and when it passes on into a higher stage, and arises when mental images are mixed up with the desires of the senses, temptations become more subtle, for the mind idealizes the sense objects, refines the grosser impulses, and presents desires in their most alluring aspect. Another stage comes when the aspirant is on the path proper, for even there the keen force of old temptations is sufficiently strong to assail him. It is in this connection that we have the statement in the Master's note, which shows the disciple how he may utilize them. He can weigh, observe, and test these seductions, waiting patiently for the time when they shall affect him no longer. 477. When the center of consciousness has separated itself from the body of desire and moved to the manasic plane, a considerable advance has been made. The man no longer looks on the body of desire as himself, but as merely a vehicle. Yet its vibrations can still affect him, for it has a life of its own, and sometimes it is as if the horses had run away with him. That is the stage spoken of in the Kathopanishad, when the driver has reined in the horses and they are going quietly, but are still liable to rush away now and then. The disciple knows when they have run away by the excitement of the senses. It is a stage of great trial. The whole nature of the man is shamed and pained by the degradation, he cannot yield without suffering. In his normal condition of consciousness the senses do not attract him, he does not feel the temptations of the body, which are really astral. Yet times come when he does feel them. This happens because the old mold of desire is not broken up, and it has been vivified from outside. The channel has not disappeared, though it is wearing out, and the danger exists that it may suddenly be filled from the outside, and then the desire form is revivified. Astral influences cause vibrations in it strong enough to affect the man's consciousness again, left to itself it would not affect him. But he comes to a place, time or person on account of which strong influences from outside vibrate through him and revivify this old form. 478. They are to be recognized as coming from outside, not from himself, so the disciple ought to understand what they are. With shame, degradation and horror he feels this thing, and wonders how he can feel it. The answer is that there is a stage in growth when seductions coming from the senses may be experienced but need not be yielded to. The man then passes them by. He says, I feel you, I recognize you, I weigh you, but I refuse to be moved. That is the meaning of the passage in the Kathopanishad, where it says the man has come to the point where he can hold the horses in. He can hold the senses under control. It is the last lesson with regard to the temptation of the senses. When it is learned, their power over the man has passed forever. Never again will they have the power to affect him, it is the last struggle with them, and when it is over the soul has escaped. 479. When that time of struggle comes, and it will come to every one, after the center of consciousness is moved on to the manasic plane, it is an immense help to realize its nature and to know how to deal with it, to be able to say, it is not I. It is simply a vibration from the lower nature sent out to me, I reject it, that is my answer. The moment you repudiate it, the sense of horror goes, you refuse to feel its influence. When you have done that, you can test yourself, and see what part of your nature it is working upon. Then you will wait with patience for the time when you will feel it no more. You trust in the law. You sit down and patiently wait, and presently it will be unable to set up any vibrations, the senses cannot make you respond to them. You say, I can wait patiently for the time when I shall not feel this thing. It is a dead form revivified that I feel, and it will soon be broken up and will fade away. There is nothing left but to wait so, perhaps for months or for years. The victory is won when you are able to do that, the mold is broken. Recognition of your patience gives the last blow to shatter it, and never again can it affect you, unless you turn your back upon the goal, which seems an impossibility. 480. There is one other thing for which this experience is valuable. Until you have passed through it you cannot help the person who yields. You cannot help any human being unless you are above him, and yet you cannot lift anyone unless you understand what he is feeling. There is a stage where you yourself are in the grip of desire, you cannot then help others who are in the same difficulty. Later, you escape. You repel desire, and reach a point where you cannot understand why another man should fall into temptation, not understanding his feelings, you cannot help him, you can point out the evil to him, but you cannot give spiritual help. You cannot pour strength into him because you are outside him, and as you are not feeling with him you feel a shock of horror. When you get that horror you are useless. You can never help anyone from whom you are repelled. It is better to leave him alone when you feel like that. You must be able to feel with a person in order to help him. 481. Even though you can feel with a person you cannot help him if he makes a wall about himself. In such a case, it is better to drop him for a time, for help given from the outside is of no use. You may have to give up trying to help a person on the physical plane, but you need not stop doing so from the inside. To help from the inside requires more courage than to do so from without. It is far more gratifying to give outside counsel and advice. It is much more satisfying to the lower nature than giving inside and unseen help. 482. Another thing, if you can help a person, do not be turned away by the opinion of someone else that he does not deserve help, nor by his own idea that you are not helping him. HPB was sometimes condemned by her own pupils. They said harsh things of her, but she was good and strong, and did not repel them, but went on helping them from the inside, leaving them to think what they would. By helping from the inside we wear away antagonism. When you have felt antagonism, antipathy of mind, to others, possibly even to your own teacher, as you do sometimes, you perhaps blame them. Where you have felt a wall you have thought it was their wall, but later on you realize that the wall was an illusion, a thing you had yourself created on, the mental plane. When going through this stage we have built wall after wall, and have suffered by the existence of the walls, until we threw them down. 483, there is a still higher stage, which is difficult to explain. There are men who make a link between the great ones and the mass of humanity. As was said of Jesus, they feel the sufferings of men and their temptations and yet they are without sin. It is the stage where the person is in an absolutely pure desire body, all dead matter has been cleared away from it, and only the power of reflecting images is retained. The man is incapable of sin. 484, suppose such persons did not exist. There would be no link between humanity and the great ones. They preserve a link, and in their perfect purity they feel in themselves the sufferings of others. This stage comes immediately before that of the master. It is the last stage of the arhat. A master cannot suffer pain, his consciousness is so perfect, he can image past experiences without suffering. The experience is to him a perfect image, without pain. But in the advanced condition of the stage before that, though the man cannot sin, and the personality is pure, it yet transmits a sense of suffering. 485. In exoteric books this stage is sometimes confused with that of the masters, and a feeling of suffering is attributed to them. It is in the stage before that there is suffering, where those in the stage of arhatship are sharing the work of the master, without having lost the susceptibility of feeling pain. The master transcends all suffering. The arhats take part in building the guardian wall, but they build it with pain. People are apt to apply to the master what is true of higher disciples only, who are still in a stage where sin is transcended, though the power to suffer is left. 486, at the lower level we may sympathize with friends until we lose all sense of difference, and we must suffer if we sympathize thus deeply. Until a hankara is transcended, sympathy and suffering must go hand in hand. If we go out of this stage too soon we lose our power of sympathy. That is one of the temptations on the path. Great ones fall back even when they have reached the last stage, because if they lose suffering altogether, they lose sympathy, and if sympathy is not perfect, the wall of separateness is not thrown down. 487. But do not condemn the man that yields, stretch out your hand to him as a brother pilgrim whose feet have become heavy with mire. Remember, O disciple, that great though the gulf may be between the good man and the sinner, it is greater between the good man and the man who has attained knowledge, it is immeasurable between the good man and the one on the threshold of divinity. Therefore be wary lest too soon you fancy yourself a thing apart from the mass. 488, AB, here we are told that we must not condemn the man who yields to temptation. When you have passed through the stage of trial, there is no fear of your condemning anyone. When temptations are transcended, and you think of the time when you still felt them, you will not condemn the man who yields. 489. The difference between the virtuous and the vicious man is comparatively little, both are struggling in the early stages, and when looked at from either side the difference is small. But when a man has attained knowledge and has seen the meaning of virtue and vice, he has made an enormous step. When he sees virtue and vice only as the pair of opposites, he has transcended knowledge. He stands on the threshold of divinity, and the difference is immeasurable. We have the warning here that if we too soon think ourselves apart from the mass, there will come the temptation to despise those below us, and then we shall fall. A person who has reached divinity looks down on no one, he can feel with all, and is one with the lowest. For 90, when you have found the beginning of the way, the star of your soul will show its light. And by that light you will perceive how great is the darkness in which it burns. Mind, heart, brain, all are obscure and dark until the first great battle has been won. Be not appalled and terrified by the sight. Keep your eyes fixed on the small light and it will grow. But let the darkness within help you to understand the helplessness of those who have seen no light, whose souls are in profound gloom. 491, AB. When we look up to the region of Atma and worship the light within, we shall see the light as it grows stronger. When you first see that light, you get a touch of consciousness by which you see the darkness in which it burns. The contrast shows it to you. It is then that darkness within that will help you to understand the helplessness of those who have seen no light. It is for them that real compassion is necessary. There is no need to feel suffering for people after they know that there is light. Compassion is needed for those who do not know that they are in darkness, but are immersed in trivial things, and yet think themselves wise. Their darkness is so great that they really do not know what causes them so much suffering. They are the people to whom the great ones send compassion. 492. Those who have seen even a little light are making progress in things of which men in the world have not caught a glimpse. When once the light is seen, this kind of compassion is not wanted. If such a man is seen to be suffering, it is recognized that he is breaking down the wall quickly, and that it is good for him that he is able to do it. 493, CWL. When we begin to have knowledge of the existence of the soul, we realize a great fact of which the vast majority of mankind knows nothing. Most people, even so-called religious people, have no certainty of the existence of the soul. Most of them are living entirely with a view to this world. They may hold a theoretical belief in the immortality of the soul, but the things of the world are more important to them, and their lives are only in comparatively few cases guided by this belief. 494. That the star of the soul may show itself, we must first be sure of the existence of the soul, we must know it as within ourselves. When we have set our affections on things above, when we know certain truths within ourselves and nothing can shake their reality for us, the star is beginning to show its light, there is a faint reflection of it. By that tiny gleam we see how densely ignorant we have been and still are. That is the first feeling we get when we gain a little more knowledge. For 95, the first great battle is the battle with the senses. In his steady fight against them, the man has arrayed himself against his lower nature, and has won through. When the gleam of light comes, we see how dark the way has been, how all our actions, and even our affections, have been without that direction which makes them real. The little light makes all seem hopelessly wrong. It makes us feel helpless, but we must not be appalled by the sight. For 96, blame them not. Shrink not from them, but try to lift a little of the heavy karma of the world. Give your aid to the few strong hands that hold back the powers of darkness from obtaining complete victory. For 97, CWL, we must be careful not to misunderstand this passage. The few strong hands are the great white brotherhood. The struggle is not against the devil as the Christian puts it, nor must we think of the black magicians as holding the powers of evil. It is the overpowering strength of matter which is meant here by the powers of darkness. Our help in the effort to overcome them is needed and is calculated upon, it is part of the scheme. For 98, there are only a few strong hands helping at present because our humanity has as yet evolved very few adepts. The Logos has based his plan on the idea that as soon as there are those who understand it, they will cooperate with it. That is shown by the fact that up to the middle of the fourth root race, indeed, even a little past that time, all the great offices in connection with the evolution of the world were held by people who did not belong to our humanity. Some came to us from Venus, others from the moon. These were great adepts who were really free, who might have gone off altogether into higher realms. But after the middle point of evolution, we ourselves were expected to develop our own teachers, and the Lord Gautama Buddha was the first of these. It is clearly intended that we not only furnish the very great officials, such as the Buddhas and Christs, but also that all of us at our very much lower level should be intelligently cooperating, and trying to push on evolution as much as we can. For 99, then do you enter into a partnership of joy, which brings indeed terrible toil and profound sadness, but also a great and ever-increasing delight. 500, AB. This means that we have come into relation with those whose life is bliss, but side by side with that experience there is still sadness because we feel the darkness people are in. You have sadness for people, because you are not yet at the point to say, when you see suffering, yes, it is well. At this stage there comes a subtle feeling about pleasure and pain that does not exist in the lower world. You feel the more keenly until the light has become perfectly clear, because the light shows up the darkness. Yet an increasing delight will come, by recognition of the law. More than that, no being is unhappy in the fundamental depths of his consciousness, because all are parts of the divine life, which is happiness itself. More and more as he progresses does the disciple contact those depths, until at last he realizes, to use the words of the Gita, that he was grieving for those who should not be grieved for. That the wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. Why should one grieve for a being who is fundamentally happy? 501, the disciple enters into a partnership of joy, but this very partnership brings toil and profound sadness, because he oscillates from one condition to the other. He must learn to feel the inner joy, and yet not lose touch with the lower principles of others, in which their sorrow is felt. He must feel that too, but must not be overwhelmed by it. The path is as narrow as the edge of a razor, but we are to maintain perfect equilibrium upon it, while the pairs of opposites play upon us. One great function of the master is to preserve our balance. The pupil will be swaying from one side to the other. When the gloom comes, the guru will send to him remembrance of the partnership of joy. When he tends to lose complete touch with the sorrows of the world, the reminder of sorrow will come. 502. For a long time the disciple is subject to these oscillations. We should not attain perfection unless we experience the different things separately, before we reached equilibrium. It is the experience of mankind that we have to learn one lesson at a time, that we may give it full attention. The disciple who is treading the path is thrown from one side to the other, until he learns to keep the balance. Sometimes an entirely causeless gloom comes down, and he finds himself deep in the shadow. He finds no reason for it, he only knows that it is there, a gloom that he cannot shake off. If he has learned the lesson rightly, he will accept that quietly and patiently, and will not try to escape from it. He will then learn sympathy and patience, and other lessons which can be learned in the gloom, not in the light. Accepted in this spirit, the period of gloom is not such an unwelcome thing, for all the worry and trouble have gone out of it. We should take the lessons, and learn without suffering. People do not suffer so much from gloom as from images. Like a child afraid of the dark, we fill the darkness of the soul with shapes of horror. The darkness is simple darkness and nothing else. It contains nothing more than the lessons which it has to teach us, and all the phantoms will, in time, disappear. The darkness can never crush us. At first it paralyzes us with fear, but at last we learn its lesson. 503. At the last initiation, that of the master, the Atma is seen as a clear light, a star, and when it spreads out, at the last breaking down of the wall, it becomes the infinite light. Before that the Arhat can feel the underlying peace of Atma when in meditative mood, but constantly he returns to the sorrow. But when a man rises to the Atmic plane in full consciousness, and the Buddhic consciousness merges into that, there is but one light seen. This is beautifully put in the voice of the silence. The three that dwell in glory and in bliss ineffable, now in the world of Maya have lost their names. They have become one star, the fire that burns but scorches not, that fire which is the upity of the flame. 504. While the man was in the causal body, he saw the sacred three as separate, but now he sees them as the three aspects of the triple Atma. Buddhi and Manas, which were twins upon a line in the Buddhic consciousness of the previous stage, are now one with Atma, the star which burns overhead, the fire which is the vehicle of the monadic flame. Then says the teacher, where is thy individuality, Lanu, where the Lanu himself? It is the spark lost in the fire, the drop within the ocean, the ever-present ray become the all and the eternal radiance. He who was disciple is now a master. He stands in the center, and the triple Atma radiates from him. 505, CWL, you enter into a partnership of joy, but it brings also terrible toil and profound sadness, says the master's note. All of that is true, but it is also true that the ever-increasing joy counterbalances the sadness. 506, every student who has developed his faculties fully is, by the hypothesis, a sympathetic man. He must pass through a period of sadness and almost of despair, because of all the sorrow and suffering which he sees. Because people are backward in evolution and are not yet reasonable, there is in evidence much more of suffering and sorrow, of anger, hatred, jealousy, envy and the like than of high virtues. So that there is a preponderance of unpleasant vibrations from humanity. This shows itself in the astral world, so that any man who becomes fully developed astrally becomes at the same time aware of the sorrow and trouble of the world, aware of it only in a vague way. But it is ever present with him as a weight resting upon him. Constantly individual instances of the astral sorrow and suffering which happen to occur in his neighborhood also press strongly upon him. In addition, any catastrophe involving a great deal of sorrow to a large number of people distinctly influences the astral atmosphere of the world. 507. The student has to learn how to receive that without being weighed down by it, and that takes a considerable time. He gradually learns to look more deeply, and as time goes on he begins to see that all this trouble is necessary under the circumstances which men themselves have created. The suffering that comes is a necessity because of their great carelessness and laxity. If men had been a little more careful, a very great part of it could easily have been avoided. I have mentioned before that the real suffering brought to us by karma from past lives is perhaps a tenth of that which comes to us, and the other 9/10 is the result of our own wrong attitude here and now, in this life. In that sense there is a vast amount of entirely unnecessary suffering. But the other side of the shield is that while people persist in taking the wrong attitude, in thinking and acting foolishly, under the eternal law suffering must come upon them. In an indirect way that is distinctly good, because it is bringing them to a sense of their own folly. The pity is that they need so very much reminding, that they cannot at once take the hint and alter their attitude, so much suffering might be saved if that could be. 508. This seems to all of us who have studied the matter very easy to see. I cherish a hope, therefore, and I think a well-founded hope, that the suffering of the world will diminish very rapidly as soon as the common-sense view of things is accepted by a fairly large minority of people. They will come to see that they are making their own trouble for themselves, and in process of time they will refrain from all that is undesirable, purely from the common-sense point of view. Members of the Theosophical Society ought to be displaying before the world an example of the theosophical attitude towards life, but there are many of them who, although they know these truths, find it hard to put them into practice. That is only natural, but at the same time one does feel that many of them might take up the new ideas a little more quickly, and it is certain that things of this sort do spread in a definite sort of ratio. One man can state a view and make a little impression, 10 men can make more than 10 times the impression, 100 men can make vastly more than 100 times the impression that one man could, unless he happened to be a rare genius. We have some 30,000 members in our society. I think if all of them were really taking this higher philosophical view of life, and were thereby obviously avoiding a great amount of suffering, they would form a powerful and striking example. In that way we could help a vast number who as yet do not know anything about the higher side of things. 509. When we begin to see that what is being done is always the best under the circumstances for everybody, our sorrow is no longer of the same kind as before. We are just as sympathetic towards others, but we are no longer overwhelmed by their suffering, we sympathize with them but do not share their feelings. The masters are profoundly sympathetic with people who are suffering, and yet we could not say that they themselves share in that suffering, because of their insight. As I have said before, a master is never sad, never depressed. It has seemed to me sometimes, however, as though even they could be disappointed with people. I do not know that I ought to say even as much as that, but I know this, that they make very strong efforts sometimes to bring about certain results, and yet those results, through the failure of their instruments, are not brought about. I do not know whether they foresee from the beginning that those efforts will fail. I cannot but feel that in many cases they do, but yet they make them precisely as though they expected them to succeed. For example, much work was done before the Great War in an attempt to avoid it. That effort failed, but whether the adepts who inaugurated it knew from the beginning that such would be the result I do not know. They worked at it as though they expected it to be successful. 510. Madame Blavatsky in many cases offered people opportunities in a similar way. Sometimes she made every endeavor to persuade them to take them, when she knew from the beginning that they would not do so. I well remember one occasion on which some people came to her to make inquiries. They seemed to me obviously unsuited for any theosophic knowledge or work, since they were not at all in the frame of mind in which it would be of use to them. She spoke to these mere casual strangers, and told them about quite intimate things which she hoped to do in the society. They were rather sneering people, who did not seem in the least worthy of such confidence, and when they went away the Countess Wachtmeister said, "Madam, why did you tell those people these things? It seems certain they are not the sort of people to whom it would do any good. They will only go away and sneer, and perhaps do us harm." Madame Blavatsky replied, "Well, my dear, some karma has brought them to me, and I must give them their chance, and do all I can for them." She thought that to take them to some extent into her confidence in that way was giving them a chance. I cannot tell, and she could, how near they may have been inwardly to taking it, but on the surface their attitude was the conventional sneering attitude. We never heard any more of them, but they had had their chance. Some past karma had evidently given them the right to the opportunity, and though it meant nothing to them then, it may possibly help them a little towards taking it when another such chance comes to them. 511. On this occasion Madame Blavatsky carried out very fully the idea of not blaming people who are in darkness. She knew that the more self-satisfied they were the more they were to be pitied. It is useless to blame anybody for being what he habitually is, because that is his level in evolution, that is as far as he has got. If he falls below his average level we may reasonably say, you know, that is wrong. You ought not to have done that, and it may possibly help him not to do it again. But the level where a man habitually is shows where he is in evolution, and however far back he is there is nothing to be gained by blaming him. It would be as foolish as to blame a child of 5 years old because he is not yet 10. 512. Then again, those very people who frequently exhibit the least pleasant characteristics have in them the potentiality of the high and noble things as well, and sometimes these come out in a great burst when an emergency arises. As I explained before, there are men whose ordinary lives are certainly at a very low level, yet in some great emergency they may show an unselfishness which enables them to throw away their lives for the sake of a comrade. Man always has the God within, and it shows out sometimes when we least expect it. Because it is there, it is always possible to appeal to it. We cannot always reach it, because it is so deeply buried, yet in most cases we are able to catch a glimpse of it in some way. 513. The sight of the suffering of the world also brings, it is said here, terrible toil. Once having seen this vast mass of backwardness and misery we cannot help working all the time to alter it. There is nothing else to be done. We can never go back into the world and be careless of the existence of the suffering and sorrow when once we have really felt it. Yet behind the toil is a great and ever-increasing delight. This comes from the recognition of the law. We see the meaning of suffering and the good that is to come out of it. Note the words, you enter into a partnership of joy. That is the real beauty of this higher life. We come into partnership with the greater people. We feel ourselves to be working for and with them, and that is of itself so great a joy that it supports us through work which otherwise we might feel it impossible to carry out. Chapter 11. Rule 21. 514, 21. Look for the flower to bloom in the silence that follows the storm, not till them. 515. It shall grow, it will shoot up, it will make branches and leaves and form buds, while the storm continues, while the battle lasts. But not till the whole personality of the man is dissolved and melted, not until it is held by the divine fragment which has created it. As a mere subject for grave experiment and experience, not until the whole nature has yielded and become subject unto its higher self, can the bloom open. Then will come a calm such as comes in a tropical country after the heavy rain, when nature works so swiftly that one may see her action. Such a calm will come to the harassed spirit. And in the deep silence the mysterious event will occur which will prove that the way has been found. Call it by what name you will, it is a voice that speaks where there is none to speak, it is a messenger that comes, a messenger without form or substance, or it is the flower of the soul that has opened. It cannot be described by any metaphor. But it can be felt after, looked for, and desired, even amid the raging of the storm. 516, CWL, the blooming of the flower is the development, the unfoldment of the soul. The worst feature of sorrow and suffering down here is the feeling that one is helpless. People engage in all sorts of struggles, and in many cases think they are predestined to fail. They will say, I have heard of certain people making rapid progress, but there is no chance for me. They are hopeless about it because they do not know. We can never again have that feeling when once the soul has unfolded itself, because we know. We shall still have struggles and troubles and difficulties, but we know for certain that as souls we are invincible. 517, as is said here, it is in the silence and the calm that the soul grows. People tell us, and I think that they often emphasize it quite unduly, that the soul grows through suffering. Put that way the statement is not quite correct. It is by making mistakes and correcting them that the soul learns how to grow, and suffering invariably comes as the result of the mistakes, but as I have explained before, the growth does not take place during the suffering, but afterwards. A person may be very much better after a surgical operation, but the improvement does not take place while the operation is being performed. 1 Anti. Page 100. In like manner, while people are in the throes of all sorts of terrible difficulties they are not growing, but by the way in which they meet those difficulties they may be learning to grow after they have surmounted them. It is in the silence which follows the storm that the flower grows. It is possible that plants may develop strength within themselves by enduring a storm, but growth can come only when the buffeting of the storm is over. We must have gone through the turmoil of battle before we gain that great reward of victory, the real unfoldment of the soul, which brings with it a calm certainty which nothing again can ever shake. 518. The whole world is crying out, as it were, for that certainty about the higher things. So eager are the people that any charlatan who professes to have direct knowledge is at once assured of a following. Any teacher who is in earnest always draws people round him, because the religions of the world have failed sadly to give any real satisfaction. The weak point of most religious teaching in regard to all the subjects is that it does not explain. It simply lays down the law, perfectly good law, such as, thou shalt not kill, but it does not explain in detail why all these things are wrong. For example, as regards anger and evil thought, nothing is taught as to the wrong done in that way so long as it does not show itself either in speech or in action. Yet Christ spoke plainly enough on matters of that sort. He declared emphatically with regard to the seventh commandment that a man who looked in the wrong way upon a woman had already committed the sin in his heart. But there is no record of his having given any explanation as to the way in which the thought form acts, which would have made his teaching on that point far more comprehensible. 519. The first step towards gaining direct certainty about spiritual or superphysical truth is that which is in effect, the first step in all occult progress, the dominating of the personality. When we have achieved that, peace comes at once, and we then find we have been living in the midst of an atmosphere of peace and did not know it. Because we ourselves made a little storm around us, for us the peace was not, even though some of our neighbors may have been living in it all the time. When this soul faculty, this certainty, is attained, nothing ever seems the same again. Because then we can no longer have any sense of hopelessness. That which we merely believe may fail us at a critical time, because the basis of belief which satisfies a man at one time does not always satisfy him at another, when perhaps he is under tremendous strain. But this certainty always satisfies. When once we have seen and known for ourselves, even though that sight and knowledge may fall away from us and we may no longer be able to cling to them, we can always say, I have seen, I have known. Just now I am not able to see or to know, but I have seen, I have known, and that certainty carries us through. 520. Indeed, when we have had this direct experience we find it very difficult to think ourselves back into the condition which we were before. It changes our whole attitude towards everything in the world. Happenings which seemed of great importance before are seen to be of much less significance. Now that we know the great inner truth of the life which really matters, the outer life which does not matter takes its proper place. Yet we have to remember that most people whom we meet are still where we were before we had that expansion of consciousness, and it is sometimes a little difficult not to lack sympathy with them, because they are pursuing will-o'-the-wisps. We forget that until yesterday we were doing the same thing. 521. The silence may last a moment of time or it may last 1,000 years. But it will end. Yet you will carry its strength with you. Again and again the battle must be fought and won. It is only for an interval that nature can be still. 522. The actual moment of complete unfoldment may take place at any point of a man's career. That is to say, when the time comes for the soul to unfold it can do so whether it has a physical body or not at the time. The silence would last only a moment, or only a very short time, here on the physical plane, but it might well last 1,000 years if the man were in the heaven world. It will come at some time to all, and once attained it can never be lost. Yet it is only for a moment that nature can be still, because evolution is steadily going on, and to stand still is not to evolve. It has been said that in occultism no man stands still, that he is always either retrograding or advancing. I do not know whether that is actually so, but it is quite certain that if he is not advancing he should examine himself, and try to find out why. There ought to be steady and continuous progress. 523. We come now to the Master Hilarian's note on Rule 21. 524. The opening of the bloom is the glorious moment when perception awakes, with it comes confidence, knowledge, certainty. The pause of the soul is the moment of wonder, and the next moment of satisfaction, that is the silence. 525. The opening of the bloom is a gradual process. Even while the bud is still tightly shut it is slowly swelling under the influence of the sun and rain and the manifold influences that play upon it. The actual bursting of the bud is comparatively sudden, but the growth is continuous. The growth has been progressing before that, it will go on after. To take another analogy, the growth of the chicken has been taking place inside the egg before, and it continues after, the breaking of the shell. There is a particular point when the shell is broken that is for us the dramatic moment, though it is really only part of a steady growth. It is the same with the growth of the soul. 526. This passage refers also to a particular stage in the disciple's life. It describes the feelings of the man when the first great truth of initiation is put before him. People are apt to think that the things that will be taught at initiation are many and various. I violate no pledge in saying that the great truths are not all given at the same time. At each stage one single fact is communicated, a fact that changes the face of the earth for the man, in the same way that the knowledge of reincarnation and karma has changed our lives. One would expect that, having a new fact put before him, it would be necessary for the initiate to grow into it and prove it. It is not so. The moment the man has the truth he recognizes it at once as true, he needs no proof. Then comes the moment of wonder, he marvels at the beauty and perfection of it. Only later does he see that this is not everything. Later vision brings more into view, but for the moment it is perfection. He wonders also that what is so obvious has escaped his notice before. Then comes the moment of satisfaction that is the silence. 527. Know, O disciple, that those who have passed through the silence, and felt its peace and retained its strength, they long that you shall pass through it also. 528. Certainly they do, because those who have unfolded the faculties of the soul know the whole system, and see it all in action before them, and because they see it, they yearn that everyone shall see it. They realize that part of that plan is that we should all help. Therefore they desire that everyone as soon as possible should be brought to see that his duty is to assist, that is the real work of the world. We all have subsidiary work to do. We have our part to play on the stage of the physical world, and we must play that part as well, as nobly, as we can. It does not matter what it is, it matters only that we should play it well. But we must remember that behind that is the real soul life, and that is the thing of greatest importance. 529. We live in an atmosphere where the means is taken for the end. Most of our education is built on that plan. For example, people are taught geometry and mathematics, but are never shown that these lead to a comprehension of how the great architect has constructed his universe. So long as we take them as ends in themselves, they lead nowhere in particular. But if we follow them up as did the ancients who invented them, we shall find they are of great use. Pythagoras taught the value of numbers and of geometry, but he taught it to the physikoi, that is, to those who were learning the secrets of life. They learnt them in order to comprehend life better, and it is from that point of view that we should study all things, not merely to make material and commercial calculations. 530. Therefore, in the hall of learning, when he is capable of entering there, the disciple will always find his master. 531. There has been a great deal of misunderstanding about those words, the hall of learning. They are used also in the voice of the silence. The three halls mentioned there may be taken in more than one way, as I have already explained. Point 1. 532, 1 Anti. Volume 2, p. 89 ss. 533. Mabel Collins, who wrote down Light on the Path, took the Hall of Learning in a very literal sense as an actual building. She speaks of having astrally entered this building and seen some of these precepts written there in golden letters on the wall. She may be perfectly right in making this statement. This experience may belong to the particular method by which she was taught, and those who taught her may have had such a temple. I do not know whether that is so, I can only say that I have never seen it. But it is quite obvious that much of what is said here about the Hall of Learning clearly refers to the astral plane, where the aspirant at first learns most of his lessons. Few men have yet developed the astral body fully. Most are still learning how to use it, therefore a great deal of work is being done at that level. Men are also gradually developing the mental body, but are not yet able to use that as a vehicle even after death. Anyone who has developed the faculties of the mental body and can look at dead people, finds them each shut up in a shell of his own thought, with certain avenues open from that shell, but only a very few, and only to a very limited degree. The dead man lives in that shell, and not in the mental world at all. That is why he is perfectly happy with his very limited ideas. Undoubtedly his capacity for bliss would be far greater if he had the whole mental plane at his disposal and had developed the faculties which would enable him to function fully on it. As it is, he is in the midst of it all, but because of his limitations he can touch only a small amount of what might otherwise be attained. 534. Few people have developed the mental body to a point at which it can be used as a vehicle. Pupils of the masters are in due course taught to travel in their mental bodies, and to form what is called the Mayavi Rupa when they wish to work on the astral plane. One who has learned to do this leaves his astral and physical bodies lying on the bed. And when he wishes to work on the astral plane he materializes a temporary astral body for that purpose and lets it dissolve again as soon as the necessity for it has passed. The master first teaches the pupil how it is done, and after that he can do it for himself, as I have explained in the Masters and the Path, 1 Op. Cit., ch. 9. 535. The assurance that the disciple will find his master in the hall of learning seems to be a direct contradiction to the direction given in the voice of the silence, look not for thy guru in those Mayavik regions, 2 Anti, Volume 2, page 102. The two passages are perfectly reconcilable if one understands what each means. The meaning here is that in the astral world the man will always find someone representing the master. The master himself will deal with him probably only on special occasions, and he will work on the astral plane generally under the direction of one of the older pupils of the master. 536. The statement in the voice of the silence is merely a warning to us not to accept any casual astral entity as a guide, without knowing exactly who he is. For there are numbers of astral beings of various kinds who are ready in the most praiseworthy way to appoint themselves as teachers. And they are not in the least deterred by the fact that they often know very much less than the people whom they propose to teach. 537. Those that ask shall have. But though the ordinary man asks perpetually, his voice is not heard. For he asks with his mind only, and the voice of the mind is only heard on that plane on which the mind acts. Therefore, not until the first 21 rules are passed do I say that those that ask shall have. 538. The first sentence in the above passage recalls a very similar one in the Gospels, in which the Christ says, "Ask, and it shall be given you, seek, and ye shall find, knock, and it shall be opened unto you." 1 Matthew 7:7. People generally take this to mean that their prayers will be answered and that if they knock at the door of heaven it will be opened to them. They vaguely think that if they try to obtain salvation it will be vouchsafed to them. This passage takes a higher standpoint, and refers quite clearly to truth and occult development. It does not apply to the ordinary man, but to the pupil who, when the first 21 rules are passed, has reached the first initiation. 539. The man who asks with his mind only is endeavoring to gain occult knowledge, trying to peer into the mysteries of life and nature, merely by his mental powers, and the Master says quite clearly that that is not enough. That man will get his reply, but only at the level on which the mind acts. That is, he will acquire only an intellectual conception of certain matters. Still, that is a very fine thing to have, and is not at all to be despised. The man who in studying theosophy obtains a firm intellectual grasp of its teaching has done exceedingly well. He then accepts it as true, because it satisfies the demands of his intellect. That is already a valuable result, but it is not actual knowledge. It is not at all the same thing as the absolute certainty which comes from knowledge gained on the intuitional plane, and the occultist thinks only of that knowledge as marking a really important advance. 540. One cannot have too keen an intellect, we may take that quite definitely for granted. It is well that we should endeavor to add to our knowledge, to develop our intellects by doing something definite, because, as I have explained before, no great progress can be made before there is mental as well as astral development. In some cases the man who gains an intellectual grasp of the theosophical system may run a considerable risk of exalting his intellect unduly. He may be tempted to criticize, to feel that he could have planned the universe much better than it is at present arranged. The man who does that is making an entirely wrong use of his intellect and will do himself harm. It would be much better for him if he were able to acquire some development along the line of feeling more deeply and keenly. But if along with his intellectual development the man can retain humility, if, while he grasps as much as he can of the system, he can yet, within himself and without, refrain from sitting in judgment upon it, then only good will result from his development. 541. We are always told that we must follow our own conscience. The dictates of conscience come from above and represent usually the knowledge of the ego on the subject. But the ego himself is only partially developed as yet. His knowledge on any given subject may be quite small, or even inaccurate, and he can reason only from the information before him. Because of this a man's conscience often misleads him. It sometimes happens that an ego who is young and knows but little may nevertheless be able to impress his will upon the personality. As a general rule, the undeveloped ego is also undeveloped in his power of impressing himself upon his lower vehicles, and perhaps that is just as well. Sometimes, however, an ego who lacks development in tolerance and wide knowledge may yet have a will sufficiently strong to impress upon his physical brain orders which would show that he was a very young ego and did not understand. 11 Anti, Volume I, Part 4, ch. 6, Confidence. 542. we cannot but obey our conscience, yet surely we might try to check and verify it by certain broad facts which no one can dispute. It may be that the inquisitors were acting under the dictates of their conscience sometimes, but if they had compared the great broad rules that they should love one another which their supposed leader, Christ, had given them, with the conscience which dictated murders and tortures and burnings, they would have waited and said, manifestly something is wrong. Let us at least take counsel before we follow our instincts in this particular matter. They would have been quite right to take such counsel, to test that conscience, by the general rules coming from one whom they themselves acknowledged as infinitely greater than themselves. They did not think of it, so came much evil into the world. Very few people will pause and consider in a case of that sort, yet one can easily see that it is the only safe thing to do. 543. So we must use our intellect in such a way that it will be an instrument of the ego, and will not be an obstacle in the path of his development. Therefore, when conscience seems to dictate to us something which is clearly against the great laws of mercy and truth and justice, we shall do well to think carefully whether the universal rule is not a greater thing than this particular application which seems to conflict with it. 544. Even before we have any definite consciousness on the intuitional plane, we often receive reflections from it. Intuitions occasionally come through into our daily life, and although most of those impressions from the higher self which are genuine come rather from the causal world than from the Buddhic, still now and then we receive a flash of the real knowledge of the spirit which cannot express itself on any level lower than the Buddhic plane. These priceless flashes bring us a knowledge which we feel to be absolutely certain, though in many cases we cannot give any intellectual reason for it. 545. We are right in feeling confident about it, if the thing is a real intuition. The difficulty for most of us at the earlier stages is that we cannot always distinguish between intuition and impulse. Dr. Bezanт has given 1 or 2 rules for that distinction. She says, if you have time to wait and see, let the matter remain for a while, sleep on it, as people sometimes say. If it be merely an impulse, the probability is that it will die away. If it is a real intuition, it will remain as strong as ever. Then, again, the intuition is always connected with something unselfish. If there is any touch of selfishness shown in some impulse coming from a higher plane, you may be sure that it is only an astral impulse and not a true Buddhic intuition. 546. Both the astral impulses and the intuitions from above enter the etheric part of the physical brain from the astral plane, but the intuition would come originally either from the causal or from the Buddhic body, as the case may be. Since both descend from above, it is often difficult to distinguish between them. We shall be able to distinguish infallibly at a later stage, because then we shall have our consciousness opened above the astral level and will know certainly whether these promptings arise in the astral body or come from a higher plane. At present most people have not that advantage, and consequently they have to exercise their best judgment with such mind as they have succeeded in developing. 547. When the 21 rules are passed and the disciple at initiation receives a touch of Buddhic consciousness, the knowledge of unity appears to him as a great spiritual fact. After that experience there is a difference between him and the ordinary man who asks with his mind. It has often been said that unity is the characteristic of the Buddhic plane. That, perhaps, requires a little more explanation. One may know something fairly completely in one's causal body, know the essence of the thing, because the ego, working through the causal body, thinks abstract thoughts. He does not need to descend to examples, for his thoughts pierce through to the heart of the matter. But all that, however wonderful it is still done from the outside. 548. The great characteristic of the Buddhic plane is that its work is done from the inside. If we want to sympathize with a man, to understand him fully in order to help him, and are working in the causal body, we, metaphorically speaking, turn the limelight upon his causal body, and study all his peculiarities. They are quite well marked and plainly to be seen, but they are always seen from without. If we want the same knowledge, possessing the faculty of the Buddhic plane, we raise our consciousness to the Buddhic plane, and there we find the consciousness of this other man as part of ourselves. We find a point of consciousness there which represents him, we might call it a hole rather than a point. We can pour ourselves down that hole and enter into his consciousness at any lower level that we wish, and therefore we can see everything precisely as he sees it, from inside him, as it were, instead of looking at him from outside. It will be easily understood how much more that lends itself to perfect understanding and sympathy. 549. When we have the wider view which such knowledge gives, and, having become one with all these different entities and all their different problems, we are studying them from within instead of from without. We can see the direction in which we ought to bring our force to bear. That is another and very great advantage, that we know how to approach problems down here. I do not mean that a man who has had a glimpse of that unity would not make mistakes on a lower plane. But he would not make such mistakes if he were able to raise his consciousness to that plane, look at the thing from that point of view, and then bring the remembrance clearly down into his physical brain and act upon it. He might not always have time to go through that proceeding, or he might not think of doing it at the moment. Therefore, at times he would make errors like other men, but certainly he would have very great advantage in the possession of that power, not only because of the greater knowledge it gave him at the moment, but also because of the wider view which would enable him to see in what direction his forces could best be used to produce the desired results. 550. To read, in the occult sense, is to read with the eyes of the spirit. To ask is to feel the hunger within, the yearning of spiritual aspiration. To be able to read means having obtained the power in a small degree of gratifying that hunger. 551. The yearning of spiritual aspiration is not the mere desire to know and understand, which we might have in connection with the causal body. It belongs rather to the higher manifestation of the Buddhic level, and it is only there that it can be fully satisfied. As I have explained, what happens in the Buddhic vehicle, if brought down to the personality, is reflected in the astral body. People consequently often mistake an emotional outrush which belongs to the astral plane for real spiritual aspiration. 552. Those who have studied occultism ought not to make that mistake, but beginners frequently do so. We very often see examples of that during religious revivalist meetings, when quite uneducated and undeveloped people are worked up into a high condition of ecstasy for the time by the preaching of some person who is full of strong emotion himself, and therefore is able to awaken it in his hearers. Some of the great emotional preachers of the past had that power very strongly indeed. I do not for a moment say that they did not accomplish a great deal of good. No doubt they did, but most of their work was confessedly what we should call astral, it was aimed at the feelings of the people. 553. Undoubtedly there are people in whom the higher aspiration can be evoked by working from below, but they are very few and they would be little likely to be found among the less cultured classes. This is not a narrow or illiberal view to take, because conditions of birth result from karma. If a person is born in a class of life in which he is uncultured and uneducated, it is because he has deserved that birth, and therefore the strong probabilities are that he is a younger soul than one who is born with greater advantages. That is not invariably so, because there are many exceptions and special cases, but broadly speaking it is true. So when evangelists of the Moody and Sankey type address themselves chiefly to the less educated people, it is on the whole to be expected that they will arouse their emotions only. And it is uncertain whether the results will or will not be permanent. If the impression made is strong enough, the memory of it will survive even when the emotion dies down, and the person who has been what they call saved may remain in his new and more exalted frame of mind. 554. These great emotional upheavals are sometimes beneficial, but in many instances they are harmful. Against the cases of people who have thereby permanently abandoned their evil life we have to set those ethers in which serious harm is done, in which people, for example, are altogether driven off their mental balance, and become weak-minded or even violently insane. Cases in which lasting benefit results are not very common, the great majority are affected only temporarily, the excitement passes and no very definite good remains. Nevertheless, it is a good thing in those cases in which people are raised even temporarily to a higher level. 555. Such emotionalism is not permissible, however, to students of occultism, because they are beyond the stage at which such excitement could advance their progress. There must be no confusion between emotion of that sort and the exaltation of the higher planes. People at such revivals often pass into an ecstatic condition in which they certainly lose control for the time. I have myself seen cases in which people stamped about, shouted loudly, and were so carried out of themselves that they did not know what they were doing. They say it is all joy. I suppose that they certainly do feel that, but it is an uncontrolled emotion, and therefore is to be avoided by the student of occultism. 556. The man who experiences Buddhic consciousness is also carried out of himself, with a bliss so intense that words altogether fail to express it, but he never loses the knowledge that he is himself. He is on a higher level, he is more himself than he ever was before, he does not lose his self-control. The ecstasy which he feels may indeed produce by reflection a certain emotion in the personality, a feeling of most intense joy on all levels, but never an uncontrolled emotion. It would never lead him into rash or ill-considered actions, to forget himself or lose his dignity. With the intense exaltation, with the indescribable bliss of the higher experience, there comes an utter peace which seems to fill the earth, whereas the lower emotions disturb the equilibrium to a most extraordinary extent. 557. A clairvoyant watching a revivalist meeting will generally see that non-human entities are gathered round it in order to take advantage of the vast waves of uncontrolled emotion. Emotion is a tremendous force, and these waves are, if we consider actual measurement, things of enormous size and power. They dash and rush about through the astral world in the neighborhood, and produce all the effect there that a great tempest would show on the physical plane. There are many astral creatures who revel in that. They plunge in and feel the greatest delight and excitement because of it. They neither know nor care whether the emotion is religious feeling or hatred or love, they want only the tremendous vibration, the swirl and sway of the storm. These beings take the greatest delight in sweeping round in its vortices, and being carried away by it, very much in the same way that surf bathers do in the sea. For that purpose these entities will stir up emotion among human beings as much as they can. They simply know that here is something which they enjoy tremendously, so they go to work to intensify it as much as possible. Very largely they are responsible for the great outbursts of force on such occasions, and these creatures make it greater just as a school of whales rushing about in rough water would make it rougher. They have just about the same amount of intelligence as those animals, so there is nothing very spiritual about it. It is not, as many people think, a divine afflatus, nor is it exactly dignified to allow oneself to be the sport of creatures at that level. 558. Only if with intense exaltation and bliss there comes at the same time a sense of uttermost calm and peace is one touching higher levels. When there is excitement and disturbance, and a loss of self-control, one is certainly down on a lower level. 559. When the disciple is ready to learn, then he is accepted, acknowledged, recognized. It must be so, for he has lit his lamp, and it cannot be hidden. 560. This is a comforting saying. Disciples are always watched, though many people find difficulty in realizing this. The great ones themselves have explained that when they look over the world the man who has lit his lamp shows out like a great flame in the general darkness. They could not miss seeing it. Carefully they are watching wherever the light is beginning to glow and are trying to help each little glow to kindle into flame, so that these also may become bearers of light to the world. 561. People are apt sometimes to criticize unwisely in this matter. Perhaps it is natural, but it would be better for them if they did not. I have myself known cases in which members, generally keenly intellectual people, who were very sharp in discriminating faults and failings in others, have said, so-and-so is a pupil of the master. I do not see that he is in any way more fit for such a position than I am myself. I have been so many years in the society, I have done such and such work, and if such and such a man with certain obvious failings may be accepted, why should not I? 562. People who make remarks like those forget the general principle which lies at the back of all occult progress. Their objection is exactly the same in nature as that which is so often brought against the law of karma. People say they cannot see the justice of certain things that have happened to them, and therefore there is no law of justice. Justice is not to be had, it is a delusion. That is precisely what it would be to say, I have made a machine to go by hydraulic power, and it does not work, therefore there is no such thing as hydraulic pressure. No sane man would say that. He would begin to look for the fault in his machine, knowing that the laws of nature are invariable, and mistakes are not made along that line. No one would take that attitude with regard to a law of physical science, yet people will do it in connection with the law of karma. If they would begin with the hypothesis that the law of karma exists, and that it invariably works, then, when they cannot see how it operates in a particular case, they would attribute the fault to themselves and their limited vision. And not make so foolish a mistake as to say that there is no such thing as the law of karma. 563. In exactly the same way, if people think themselves better in various ways than others who are selected by the masters as pupils, they should remember that the master makes his selections with unerring judgment. There are no doubt many things on higher planes which even a master does not yet know, but quite certainly with regard to all these lower planes with which we have anything to do, his knowledge may be accepted as infallible. There are higher adepts who stand above the masters, such as the Manu and the Bodhisattva, the Buddha and the great Lord of the world, who must know certain things which even our masters do not know, that is clear. The logos of the solar system must know still more, and beyond that there must be higher logoi who have yet wider knowledge. But we may be quite sure of the master's judgment and accuracy with regard to these planes which he has fully and finally mastered. Therefore, if he chooses a man he is not making a mistake. 564. Even in the rare case when a man afterwards falls away and acts unworthily, it does not follow that the master made a mistake in selecting such a man. The man must have had the right to that splendid opportunity, and because he had earned that right the opportunity had to be given him. A vast amount of trouble may have been taken in the training of such a pupil, and it looks as though it were wasted, but that is not so. It will all count somewhere, somehow, in the course of his evolution, that is certain. The master sometimes offers an opportunity to a man because he has earned it, although there may be in that man along with certain good qualities others less desirable, which would make him unsuitable if they happen to get the upper hand. Nevertheless the offer is made because it is just that it should be made. 565. Sometimes there are special links between egos which many lives later culminate in the close relationship of master and pupil. There is the well-known case of our late Vice President, Mr. Sinnott. Long ago he was a powerful nobleman in Egypt. His father had built and endowed a great temple. Therefore he had a vast amount of influence, and was practically the controlling power of that temple. One of those who are now our masters was a prisoner of war in Egypt at the time, and Mr. Sinnott and I were soldiers in the army which captured him. He was a person of distinction in his own country, and consequently he was assigned to our care, because captives of high rank were very well treated in Egypt, and were entertained by people of rank corresponding with their own, so long as they did not try to escape. So he lived in the house of Mr. Sinnott for 2 years, and in the course of that time became keenly interested in the occult work of the temple, and wished to take part in it. Mr. Sinnott was able to give him the desired introduction to occult study. He made the most astonishing progress in it, and in every life thereafter he continued the studies begun in ancient Chem. In a later life he became an adept, while his benefactor of Egypt had by no means reached that level. When in this incarnation he found that he wanted to spread theosophical truths in the world, because the time was come when the world was ripe to receive them, he looked round for someone to do it. And saw his old friend and benefactor as the editor of a great daily newspaper, and well qualified to do this very piece of work. He discharged this old debt by giving him that opportunity. We know how well and nobly he took it. That shows that one may have made a link far away in the past with one who has since become an adept, and that his discharge of the debt naturally takes the form of giving help and information, and of drawing the man close to him. 566. So in various ways links may be made, and it may well be that the person who is chosen as a disciple is by no means perfect, but he could not be chosen in that particular way if he were not worthy. That he has still certain faults and failings does not debar him if he has other and greater recommendations, if the advantages overbalance the disadvantages. There are many circumstances which may operate in the taking of a particular pupil by a master. We may be quite sure that he cannot be taken unless he deserves it, but we may not be able to see how he has deserved it. The converse of that proposition is equally certain, that no one who deserves it can fail to be observed and be taken. It is not wise to use this lower mind, which we have developed with so much pain and trouble, in criticizing the actions of the masters, who know far more than we. We may not always be able to understand why they do this or that, but those who follow them should at least so far trust them as to say, I know the master must be right. I do not see plainly why. As far as I am concerned, I know that I shall be taken when I am ready. My business is to make myself fit for it. In the meantime, I have no concern with what the master does with regard to other people. 567, that is much the wisest. It is the same with the work we are given to do. If it seems outwardly to be a failure, we should not allow that to discourage us. We may not have achieved the result that we expected, but we may have achieved exactly the result which the master intended. He does not always tell us all that is in his mind. He will set us a piece of work to do, and we think that what is to us the obvious result of that work is necessarily what he is aiming to get from it. It may be that he has in his mind quite another idea. He may even wish to train the worker in a particular way, not to be disappointed by failure, for example, or it might have reference to something else of which the worker knew nothing at all. I have had several instances of that in the course of my experience of occultism. We were told to do certain things, and supposed them to be aimed at a certain result, which did not come. We wondered. But in after years it has been seen that something quite different would not have been attained when it was, if that work had not been done. I have no doubt at all that in that case the master gave us the work, not with the object we supposed, but with the other object of which we knew nothing. 568. So I would say to those who grumble at what they consider faults in disciples, and say they ought not to be chosen, you must be taking a partial view, you are using your intellect in a line where it is not useful. If you know of the existence of the masters, and understand anything of their powers, you may be very sure that they know exactly what they are doing, and if you do not see what it is, after all it is not essential that you should. They know. That is the important thing. The recognition is not always made known at once to the disciple. The ordinary course is that a man who has shown himself worthy of the high honor of discipleship is brought somehow into close touch with one who is already a disciple of his future master. And the master through that disciple usually gives some instructions to him. 1 Anti, Volume 2, page 66, 103. Probably the master will say to the older disciple, bring so-and-so to me astrally one night. The man is brought, and then the master says to him, I have been watching your work, and I think that you can perhaps make a further advancement. I offer you the position of a probationary pupil if you will undertake to devote all your energies, or as much as you can, to the service of humanity, in a direction which I shall indicate. That is the most usual procedure, but sometimes such a recognition as that comes only after a very long period. And even then there may be reasons why the man should know nothing of it in his waking consciousness. 569. I remember a peculiar case in India. There was an old man, an orthodox Hindu, who had been living an exceedingly good, useful, and busy life. He was a man who had shown no selfishness, and had devoted himself as far as he could to the welfare of humanity. He had first dealt very admirably with all his family duties, and had then used all his time and money in doing good from his point of view. He had always held, before the Theosophical Society came to his notice, that the great rishis not only must have existed in the past, but must also exist in the present, and he hoped some day to come near them, but was quite humble about it. He would say, I know it is for them to make the advance, not me. I have sought them, and tried to carry out what must be their will all these years. At last, one day, one of our masters spoke to this man, and said, For 40 years I have watched your work, and in many cases have guided you, although you knew nothing of it. Now the time has come when it is best for you that you should know it. 570, that is a very striking example, and it does seem to show that there may be many altruistic people doing work under the direction of our masters, although they know nothing of such direction. There may be reasons which in this life make it undesirable that they should know. We may be very sure that the master knows best, and, if he does not choose to declare himself, we need not therefore suppose that he is not watching. 571. In these relations the master always does exactly what is best for the man as well as what is best for the work, because he has the enormous advantage of dealing with these things at higher levels. Where one has not to balance good against evil, as in the lower planes, where very often one can do good in one direction only when one does some harm in another way. This recondite matter was alluded to by the Manu, when he said that there was no fire without smoke. But there is fire without smoke, pure good without any adverse consequences or associations, on the higher levels, because all is working together for the good of the whole, and the advancement of the whole includes the advancement of the unit also. Even though it may seem in some cases that harm is done, that a person is checked, it is because it is best for his progress that such a check should then come, like the pruning of a tree, which might easily be thought by the tree to be a cruel act, and yet is emphatically intended for its benefit. 572, but to learn is impossible until the first great battle has been won. The mind may recognize truth, but the spirit cannot receive it. 573. The ego sends impressions through to the lower planes as soon as he begins to become awakened, but there are many things that stand in his way. He can do nothing until the astral body is controlled. Because if it is a mass of surging emotions, how can the ego send down through that body any coherent or rational instruction? The first great battle is with the passions, with the senses, and he must conquer them. But when that is done he has still the mind to meet, and it may be that the mind will prove a more formidable adversary even than the astral body. 574, then the master goes on to speak about the knowledge which is attained by this intuition. I have already explained that at each initiation the candidate receives a key of knowledge which puts a different complexion upon life for him, shows him a deeper depth, a fuller unfolding, as it were, of the meaning of the occult teaching. 1 Anti, Volume 2, page 351. Each time, as he receives it, it seems to the man to be final. He says, "Now I have all knowledge, this is so satisfying, so complete, it is impossible that there could be more. There is an infinity yet to be learnt." He is only on the road of learning. As he goes on, more and more will be unfolded before him. The master knows precisely at what stage it is most useful to give certain information. People often think they ought to have it all at once. That is just as foolish as it would be to expect a teacher to explain the differential calculus to a child who was only just learning the multiplication table. He must go through many intervening stages before he can know even remotely what it means. 575, it is exactly so with us. We are a little apt often, again comes that intellectual conceit, to think that we know at least enough to be trusted with all possible knowledge. I can only say that they know better than we what is best for us, and whatever is best for each one is also that which is best for the whole. 576. While many people recognize that that must be so, and that of course the whole must take precedence over any part, they do sometimes feel a little that the parts are being ignored, that while everything is working for the good of the whole, yet individual parts often suffer by the way. The world is better managed than that. Actually, that which is best for the whole is also best for each one of the parts, and not only is justice done to humanity as a whole, but it is so done as to involve no injustice to any of the units of humanity. Let us be sure of that, and realize it with absolute certainty, then we shall have no feeling of doubt or dismay, and whatever happens we shall be able serenely to trust that it is being done for the best. 577. Once having passed through the storm and attained the peace, it is then always possible to learn, even though the disciple waver, hesitate, and turn aside. The voice of the silence remains within him, and though he leave the path utterly, yet one day it will resound, and rend him asunder and separate his passions from his divine possibilities. Then, with pain and desperate cries from the deserted lower self, he will return. 578. In such a case there would be indeed a terrible struggle. Let us not submit ourselves to that. It is better, while yet we may, to keep ourselves well in hand and not make ourselves the subjects of such a surgical operation as that of the tearing apart of the higher and lower self. The struggle with the lower self goes on all the time. If the disciple allows it to fasten its fangs into the higher and to draw him away from his greater possibilities, he must inevitably suffer terribly when the time of separation comes, as it must come. For those who have entered the stream can leave it only by reaching the further shore. 579. Therefore I say, peace be with you, my peace I give unto you, can only be said by the Master to the beloved disciples who are as himself. 580. There is a very interesting point in regard to the distinction the Master makes here. Peace be with you is only an ordinary Eastern salutation, though a beautiful one. When we say, goodbye, which means, God be with you, it is the same thing, for God is peace. The salam of the Mohammedans is again the same as salam in Jerusalem.